Chapter 221. It seemed that the child was not completely indifferent. He was just like that to strangers. Come to think of it, it made sense. With such an experience, no one would be happy. In the slums, children of this age were much more knowledgeable and sensitive. Brother Wu. Brother Wu. The triplets ran over. Old man Chang felt more at ease after bringing his grandson back. Plus, business had been good recently, and he had added an upgraded version of the medicine he bought for Chang Xiaowu. Old man Chang smiled and looked at the triplets running over. He turned to Chang Xiaowu and asked, "Xiaowu, do you want to go upstairs and rest?" Chang Xiaowu shook his head. "Let's go downstairs." Silin could tell a lot from Chang Xiaowu's words. He didn't even need to touch him directly to examine him, he could tell from his voice that the child's lungs were weak. Perhaps that was why the child was so reticent. Okay. Old man Chang was used to this. The triplets brought out a recliner and looked at Chang Xiaowu and old man Chang as if they were asking for praise. Chang Xiaowu showed a rare smile. Old man Chang carefully placed Chang Xiaowu on the recliner and took out 2 pills and a bottle of medicine. Take the medicine first, then play with them. Children generally did not like to take medicine. This was a kind of nature, but for Chang Xiaowu, who took more medicine than compressed capsules, it was a common occurrence. He took the medicine expressionlessly and was drinking warm water to buffer it. Suddenly, he noticed a pair of eyes staring at him. It was not the strangers. Chang Xiaowu looked up and saw Hui Mao squatting next to the shelf. At this moment, the cat was looking at him with its round eyes. The look in its eyes was not like that of an ordinary cat that did not know anything, but more like the look of a person. However, there was no contempt or pity in its eyes, only curiosity. It moved its nose and sniffed. Who knew what it smelled, and it wagged its tail. The triplets followed Chang Xiaowu's gaze and became excited. They rushed to introduce it. "Brother Wu, let me tell you, it's called Wheeze. It's very smart, it can talk. Don't take my words. You're the one who's taking it." Silin was speechless. He was ignored. Sure enough, for children, the charm of a cat was infinite. Old man Chang just watched from the side, amused. He didn't ask for much. He just wanted his children to be happy. Chang Xiaowu was already used to the triplets. He gestured for them to stop and looked at Hui Mao. "Your name is Wheeze." Hui Mao just flicked his tail and didn't say anything. Chang Xiaowu asked again, "You can talk?" Under the gazes of the 4 pairs of eyes, Hui Mao lazily stretched his back with his butt in the air. Then, he squatted down again to look at the 4 children. The 4 of them, Chang Xiaowu looked at the triplets. He wasn't suspecting that the triplets were lying, but he was wondering if the cat was messing with them. The triplets were also angry, but before they could complain, Hui Mao jumped down and ran to the 4 of them. Then, he jumped lightly onto the recliner Chang Xiaowu was sitting on. Then, he went to Chang Xiaowu's lap to find a suitable place to sleep. Because there was a blanket on Chang Xiaowu's lap, it was comfortable to sleep there. Chang Xiaowu didn't know what to say to the gray cat after it found a comfortable place to rub itself against his thighs and lay down without a care in the world. However, this was the first time he had come into close contact with an animal, and he didn't know why other animals avoided him when they saw him. It reminded him of the people who talked behind his back, so Chang Xiaowu didn't have much passion for animals. This cat, however, was an exception. Silin's mouth twitched. He didn't say anything. This cat was trying to tease children. Therefore, he didn't care about them anymore. He turned around and told old man Chang about Haas's list. The flying car was already parked at the side, waiting for maintenance. "Oh, Haas. That guy has high requirements for flying cars. He's always in a hurry and changes the parts frequently." Old man Chang had a general understanding of Haas's situation. He contacted Haas and then hurried to repair it with Silin. Chang Xiaowu stiffened the moment the gray cat jumped onto his lap. He was a little lost for words. After all, this was too much of a surprise for him. He was already surprised that the cat didn't run away, and now it was sleeping on his lap. The triplets didn't care about Huimao's uncooperative behavior. They chuckled and said, "It seems that Hulu likes fifth brother very much." Chang Xiaowu stretched out his chubby little hand and gently poked Huimao's soft belly. Little 8 played with the pads on Huimao's front paws. Little 6 scratched Huimao's chin. Huimao squinted his eyes and let them do as they pleased. He tilted his head, indicating that little 6 could scratch somewhere else. Chang Xiaowu frowned and watched for a long time before he mustered up the courage to touch Huimao's ear. It felt good and soft. Huimao ignored Chang Xiaowu's actions. He just flicked his ear out of habit when Chang Xiaowu touched it. Chang Xiaowu's finger was flicked by his ear, but it didn't hurt at all. Instead, Chang Xiaowu found it interesting. He boldly touched the long hair on the cat's ear again. The cat's ear flicked a little more. It had to be said that Chang Xiaowu was addicted to playing with it. Old Man Chang and Silan roughly checked Hasa's flying car. His eyes glanced at his grandchildren, and his face wrinkled with a smile. He said, "Hulu is quite popular with children." "Yes, that guy has a lot of ideas." Old Man Chang shifted his gaze back and looked at the wiring diagram and the parts of the flying car. He said, "Hasa's car has been constantly modified. He even went to the city to modify it a few times. The structure is getting more and more complicated." Silan nodded in agreement. There were obvious signs of modification in many places, but there were quite a few places that were a bit superfluous, and they weren't the best modifications. But Silan couldn't really say anything about these. After all, the owner liked them. Old Man Chang took out the new parts that Haas had left behind and looked at them. They seemed to be some of the parts that sold very well in the city a while ago. "However, I don't have much contact with these things, so I can only give it a try." Silan had never seen these parts before. However, he could speculate the specific functions of the car just by looking at these parts and the assembly of the car. "Let's give it a try," Silan said. "Yes, with the two of us working together, I believe we can take care of this thing." Old Man Chang felt that Silan actually knew a lot and had a good eye for things. His evaluation of Silan was that he was not arrogant or rash, and that he was a good young man with real talent. This was the first time the two of them had come into contact with new parts, but they quickly understood the functions of these parts. They studied the wiring diagram and the assembly. "Silan, take a look and see what needs to be changed." Old Man Chang handed the assembly diagram to Silan. Silan looked at the assembly diagram drawn by Old Man Chang. He didn't directly point out the problems or what went wrong. Instead, he asked about the reasons why Old Man Chang had drawn it in such a way. There was a kind of coordination between the parts. Just looking at the parts might not be able to tell anything. However, when Old Man Chang was inspecting the two flying cars as a whole, Silan had already dissected the car in his mind. He knew what needed to be paid attention to after replacing the car with new parts. After seeing the assembly diagram drawn by Old Man Chang, he also understood which parts had bigger problems. Old Man Chang was, after all, experienced. Although Silan didn't directly point it out, Old Man Chang understood that Silan had really seen the problem. Instead of being unhappy, Old Man Chang was actually very happy. At his age, coupled with his family's circumstances, Old Man Chang didn't have much time to learn new skills. He had benefited greatly from Silan's arrival. Having been a maintenance worker for decades, he knew the value of learning new skills. It was precisely because he understood this that Old Man Chang's spirits were lifted when he heard Silan's words. After sharing his thoughts, Old Man Chang looked at Silan and said, "Silan, there's no need to hold back. Just tell me. I want to learn as well." It's rare to learn something new after so many years. Seeing that Old Man Chang was sincere, Silan didn't beat around the bush. From the macro to the micro, from the whole to the parts. Other than those few parts, he also mentioned some minor problems that didn't need to be fixed. At the very least, Old Man Chang would have more ideas when he drew the assembly diagram the next time. After some tinkering, the two of them finally confirmed the final assembly diagram. It wasn't the theoretically optimal assembly, but it was the assembly that was most suitable for the owner. Once the assembly diagram was confirmed, they got to work quickly. With the two of them working together, they quickly replaced the new parts one by one. Just like before, Silen took a look at the car's operating system. It was also a dual operating system. However, it was obvious that this owner often dealt with the system's garbage. It wasn't as cumbersome as the previous owner. However, there were a few settings that didn't work. At the very least, there were some conflicts with the new parts. So, Silen made some changes. The main settings and operations were still what the owner was used to. So, as long as he didn't check the program thoroughly, the owner wouldn't notice that the operating system had been changed. He would only feel that it was much more convenient. Once it was convenient, the flying car would also run much faster. After the maintenance and testing of the car's performance, Old Man Chang wiped the sweat off his forehead and smiled happily. He had learned a lot today. After Old Man Chang rested for a while, he contacted Haas. Haas was still surprised. It should be known that this was a new part for this area. It would definitely take a lot of time to understand it. He sent it to Old Man Chang with the intention of saving money. It was too expensive to change the parts in the city, and he wasn't that rich. This can't be a joke, can it? Even though he knew Old Man Chang's character, Haas couldn't help but think in that direction. When he received Old Man Chang's notice, he couldn't care less about the business at hand and rushed over. While Old Man Chang was waiting for Haas, a few people walked into the shop. Silen knew the person in the lead. It was the owner of the car that Silen had helped him clean up the operating system. "Hey, Old Man Chang, I'm here to get you some business." "Oh, it's Band. How's your car?" Although he asked this, Old Man Chang was very confident that Band was using it well. Otherwise, he wouldn't have introduced him to customers. Now that a customer had arrived, the triplets didn't surround Hui Mao and Chang Xiaowu anymore. They ran over to bring chairs and pour water for Ban to say that he was sensible. Old Man Chang was naturally very happy when his own child was praised. "Your business here is not bad. Every time you come here, you're always busy. This car is Haas's. That guy wants to change the parts again. How enviable." Band looked around and said. However, Band looked at Chang Xiaowu, who was sitting on a recliner not far away, and looked away. He told Old Man Chang why he was here. Chang Xiaowu looked down, and his eyes were gloomy again. However, when he saw the disdain in Hui Mao's eyes for Band and the others, he felt a lot better. He mimicked the triplets and scratched Hui Mao's chin, asking Hui Mao why he was looking down on them. Hui Mao jumped onto Chang Xiaowu's shoulder and whispered into his ear, "That guy only knows how to brag. He's petty." Chang Xiaowu couldn't help but smile. One reason was that Hui Mao had finally spoken, and the other was that the cat was really clever. Band had been repairing cars at Old Man Chang's place, and he was very satisfied with the last repair. His relative's flying car was also broken, but he couldn't bear to spend money to repair it. When he heard Haas say that Old Man Chang's shop in this area was not bad, and the price was reasonable, he came here with the mentality of giving it a try. After all, the flying car had been bought for less than 3 years, and it looked good. He couldn't bear to sell it. "You guys try it carefully. If it doesn't work, then forget it. Don't make it worse." Listening to the owner's rambling, Hui Mao whispered into Chang Xiaowu's ear, "Look, another petty guy with a crooked eye. Didn't you see what kind of car it is? This kind of car is lacking in calcium when it runs, what's the point of treasuring it?" Chang Xiaowu's face twitched. Calcium deficiency? It seemed like his old car was even more lacking in calcium. But hearing Hui Mao talk about that person like that, Chang Xiaowu couldn't hide his smile. In the eyes of others, it was just the unlucky Chang Xiaowu having fun with his pet. They wouldn't think that these two guys were talking bad about them. Silen looked at the cat that was whispering into Chang Xiao's ear, and he knew very well what it was saying. But speaking of which, this owner was really a pain in the ass. Although the owner's character wasn't good, he was here to give money, after all. Silen wouldn't care about such things. With a sincere smile on his face, he listened to the owners nagging with old man Chang. But no one could tell what they were thinking under their smiles. One was experienced, and the other was also experienced. With great difficulty, the owner walked away, looking back 3 times with every step he took. Silen finally let out a sigh of relief, looked at old man Chang, and smiled. They didn't say much, and began to study the flying car. It wasn't difficult to repair the car. Its structure was similar to the run-down cars of the residents of the district who came for maintenance. It was just that its appearance was a little brighter, and its operating system was a little more advanced. Soon, old man Chang and Silen got to work. During dinner, Hui Mao ate at the table as usual. No one objected to this phenomenon. The 4 children took extra care of Hui Mao, often picking out some good food from their plates for Hui Mao. Even Chang Xiaowu did the same. Old man Chang was pleased. It was rare for Xiaowu to be in a good mood, and he seemed to be in a good mood today. The recovery of a person's body was closely related to their mood. Chang Xiaowu's body wasn't good to begin with, and he had a congenital hidden danger. Coupled with his gloomy mood, it was reasonable for his body to be in a worse condition. When he was in a good mood, his body's condition would be much better. At night, Hui Mao planned to play with the little ones in the house. Chang Xiaowu had a small room to himself. He didn't sleep well, and old man Chang was afraid that the triplets, who loved to toss and turn, would affect Chang Xiaowu at night, so he divided the room into a small room. The triplets went to take a shower. When Hui Mao came over, Chang Xiaowu was already lying on the bed reading a book. Seeing Hui Mao come over, Chang Xiaowu put down the book in his hand and patted the bed. He wasn't afraid that Hui Mao would dirty the bed, and he motioned for Hui Mao to come to the side. Hui Mao didn't stand on ceremony, but he didn't step on the bed like ordinary cats did. Hui Mao was actually very clean. "What book are you reading?" Hui Mao looked at Chang Xiaowu curiously. He put down the book next to him, hooked his claws, and opened the book. It was filled with flashing circuit diagrams and various models, and some programs were inserted. If others saw Chang Xiaowu reading such an advanced book at such a young age, they would definitely be shocked and think of him as a genius. To understand such a book, one must have received a higher level of education, but Chang Xiaowu was basically self-taught. If he wasn't a genius, then what was he? But Hui Mao didn't think in that direction at all. He lowered his head and casually flipped through the pages with his claws. Chang Xiaowu also thought that the cat was just playing. As he read, Hui Mao's whiskers trembled, trembled again, and trembled again. Meow. Hui Mao lifted his claws and flipped the book off the bed. He said disdainfully, "Nonsense. What the best program? That's bullshit." In Silen's words, "It's misleading and worse than a beast." Chang Xiaowu stared blankly at the cat that had flipped his book and was still swearing. For a moment, he was stunned and didn't know what to say. If it was really misleading, then so be it, but how could it be worse than a beast? "Master Cat, did you use the wrong words in your excitement?" He really couldn't figure out how this book could make this master so angry. After all, this was a book that old man Chang had always admired. His grandfather, old man Chang, used to read this book. "This book is wrong?" Chang Xiaowu asked. Hui Mao looked at Chang Xiaowu angrily and pointed his claws at the book that had been flipped on the floor. "It doesn't have many correct words." Chang Xiaowu was silent for a moment. This book was indeed from decades ago. The current programming books had definitely improved a lot, but old man Chang was not very good at programming. He mostly focused on maintenance, and most of the teaching materials were old versions from decades ago. Chang Xiaowu had always been reading these books, so much so that he could recite them by heart. As for practice, unfortunately, he didn't have the opportunity. Chang Xiaowu had actually thought of upgrading the operating program of the old machines at home, but since the first time he upgraded the program of the small cleaning robot, he had fainted and stayed in the hospital for 10 days. He hadn't touched it since then. He only read books and didn't actually operate it. Not to mention that Hui Mao's direction of thinking was different from that of humans. Chang Xiaowu's direction of thinking was not much normal. He didn't think for a moment about why this cat could understand these things. After thinking about it, Chang Xiaowu said, "This book is from decades ago. It's a bit outdated now. Whether it's from that time or not, this is a scam." Hui Mao was so angry that his whiskers were trembling. Who wrote this book? How dare they fool a child? Even a cat couldn't tolerate a fish. Chapter 222. Hui Mao was really angry, but it didn't realize that this book had not only fooled children, but it had also fooled many adults. Chang Xiaowu looked at Hui Mao, who was shaking his whiskers on the edge of the bed. He didn't say anything. Felines were really temperamental. However, Hui Mao's words really shocked Chang Xiaowu. Although he sometimes felt that the things recorded in the book were a little far-fetched, he didn't think that Hui Mao was talking about nonsense. Now that Hui Mao said this, Chang Xiaowu felt that he agreed with Hui Mao. Even a child without formal education like him could see where the book was twisting words and forcing logic, so other people would be able to see more. If people knew what Chang Xiaowu was thinking, they would probably jump off the aircraft. Even people with higher education couldn't understand it. In fact, books like this were generally only circulated among the lower classes. It would never appear in the upper class. "Is there an electronic board?" Hui Mao asked. "Yes." Chang Xiaowu got up and took out an antique electronic board from behind his pillow. This was used by his father and was later passed down to his generation. Hui Mao raised his paw and pulled the electronic board in front of him. He moved his paw and began to operate it. Chang Xiaowu looked at Hui Mao's cat paw as it naturally entered characters on the old-fashioned electronic board. He wondered how the cat's paw grew. Hui Mao's movements became faster and faster. At first, Chang Xiaowu could still see Hui Mao's movements and the program that was entered on the electronic board. However, Chang Xiaowu's vision couldn't keep up with it. He could only barely see the program that was quickly appearing on the electronic board. After that, he could only see the program characters flashing, but he couldn't tell what the program was. In fact, Hui Mao's movements were just a cover. If it wanted to activate the program on this old-fashioned electronic board, it didn't need to move its paw. When Chang Xiaowu couldn't keep up with Hui Mao's paw movements, Hui Mao directly activated the program inside. However, since Silan said to keep a low profile, he would cover it up like this for now. 10 minutes later, Hui Mao pushed the tablet to Chang Xiaowu. "Look at this. Stop looking at that nonsense." Chang Xiaowu took the electronic board and looked at the detailed parts assembly and program analysis. He was stunned for a moment, but as he looked, he became immersed in it. Right now, Chang Xiaowu felt as if he had come into contact with a whole new horizon. It was refreshing and surging. When Chang Xiaowu finished reading the fifth example, the screen of the electronic board turned black. Chang Xiaowu finally recovered from his thoughts. He looked at the power source of the electronic board and checked the electronic board again and again. There was no problem. Why did the screen turn black? "Stop looking. I've turned it off. Your body needs rest now." Silan said that you need to maintain your sleep schedule at night. "But I can't sleep." Chang Xiaowu felt extremely wronged. He was just enjoying the show and now it was gone. What the hell was going on? "Then, do you want me to help you?" Hui Mao moved his claws. "How are you going to help me?" Chang Xiaowu swallowed his saliva. He felt that Hui Mao's gaze was a little sneaky. Silan said that a person's body will recover faster in a state of sleep. "If you really can't sleep, I'll give you a push and you'll fall asleep." As he spoke, Hui Mao waved his claws. Chang Xiaowu. This kind of physical method was too intense. It was better not to use it. Chang Xiaowu touched his head and shivered. Then let nature take its course. I'll be able to sleep after emptying my mind. The gray cat shook its ears. Actually, Silan said that you can hypnotize yourself, but hypnosis affects your brain's nerves. Your memory will probably deteriorate after a couple of times of hypnosis, so you should try to sleep as hard as you can. I heard from Silan that he can even analyze problems while he's sleeping. Why don't you give it a try and put these programs into practice in your mind? There were a few more things that Hui Mao didn't say. This method would only be effective for some people. Most people would be even more excited. However, after hearing Hui Mao's words, Chang Xiaowu nodded. Hui Mao's suggestion was really good. He would give it a try. Okay, that's it then. I'm going to sleep too. Hui Mao yawned and jumped out of bed. When he left, he stepped on the book again. Good night, Wheeze. Good night. After Hui Mao left, Chang Xiaowu turned off the lights and opened his eyes to look at the pitch-black room. The voices of the triplets could vaguely be heard outside. Old man Chang was probably forcing the triplets to sleep. Children needed to grow, so sleep was very important. Thinking about what he experienced today, Chang Xiaowu smiled. Then, he closed his eyes and began to think about the 5 examples he had seen before. As he thought about it, he subconsciously got into the zone. Hey, Wheeze, why are you squatting here? Old man Chang had finally coaxed the 3 little fellows to sleep and was about to go downstairs to clean up. He didn't expect to see Hui Mao squatting at the door of Chang Xiaowu's room. After Hui Mao went out, he didn't leave until Chang Xiaowu really fell asleep. Hearing old man Chang's words, Hui Mao got up and shook his hair. I'll go right away. When Hui Mao arrived at Silan's room, Silan was thinking about something. He saw Hui Mao walk in and said, "That little guy is asleep." Yes, it's similar to you. They both used the same method. Jumping to Silan's side and lying down, Hui Mao continued, although Xiaowu's body isn't that good, he's not stupid. Among humans, that child's brain is already considered a genius. Genetic mutation. Triplets don't have this kind of behavior. It's probably because he experienced an electromagnetic storm in his mother's womb. His brain cells are a little different from ordinary people. With that body of his, can he use strengthening drugs? I don't think so. He has to undergo thorough treatment. Hui Mao rubbed his ear and said with some annoyance, won't that require a lot of money? How about, Silan, let's go rob him. Fuck off. We don't have anyone to rely on now, so we can't act recklessly. But, we can use another method. Although it's a little slower, it'll give Chang Xiaowu some time to adapt. This way, when we go for thorough treatment in the future, the success rate will be higher. Silan touched his chin. To slowly nurse Chang Xiaowu's body, the drug aspect had to be the main consideration. Actually, Silan had some drugs stored in the League of Stars in the ring with the curly leaf pattern. There were all kinds of drugs, and he could secretly add them when Chang Xiaowu took his medicine. He just needed to pay attention to the dilution ratio, which was easy to solve. Then, it was time to make money. Recently, Old Man Chang's shop's business was getting better and better, and Silan's dividends were also increasing. The two of them worked together, and the efficiency was high. The maintenance effect was good, and the regular customers even introduced more customers. Silan had discussed the problem of the drugs with Old Man Chang in private, but he didn't let Chang Xiaowu know. If Chang Xiaowu knew that Old Man Chang was going to give him a thorough treatment in the future, with Chang Xiaowu's personality, his mood would be affected, and that would be the opposite of what he wanted. Old Man Chang believed that the drugs Silan had in his hands were all brought from the Imperial City area, so the quality would definitely be much better than the drugs from their small place. They were also much more expensive. He was a little at a loss. Pay? How much? He estimated that even if he sold the whole shop, he wouldn't be able to afford the drugs in Silan's hands. Silan said that this was a repayment to the family of his savior, and that he didn't want money. Old Man Chang didn't pretend to refuse. If he said that, it would be hypocritical. Sometimes, Old Man Chung couldn't help but sigh. It was just a coincidence that he saved a person. Not only did he help himself, but he also helped Xiaowu. Therefore, from then on, Old Man Chung would give half of the daily income to Silan. Originally, he was prepared to split it 30-70, but Silan rejected it. On this day, Silan and Old Man Chung finished the 3 orders they received and were preparing to have dinner by hand when the triplets ran over. Grandpa! Grandpa! We're almost out of compressed fish capsules. The triplets and Chung Xiaowu all looked at Old Man Chung. The look in their eyes made people feel that even if they didn't eat, they would buy compressed fish capsules for Huimao. Looking at the sky, there was no time to go out today. Old Man Chung said, "I'll go buy more tomorrow." "I'll go tomorrow." "I haven't been out of this place yet," Silan said. The triplets looked at Silan, their eyes full of hope. Needless to say, the 3 little ones wanted to go out and play. In the past, there was only Old Man Chung, so the triplets were a bit more self-conscious. But now that there was Silan, there was someone to take them out to play. "Not this time, maybe next time. I want to familiarize myself with this area, or it'll be troublesome if I get lost." Although they couldn't go this time, Silan said that he would take them out the next time he went out. However, they would take turns, from the youngest to the oldest, and only one at a time. The triplets didn't have any objections to this. The next day, Silan woke up early and made a list of the things Old Man Chung wanted to buy. It wasn't much, just some daily necessities. Old Man Chung wanted to pay for them, but Silan didn't accept it. Silan had more than 1,000 MB on hand for the past few days, so it would only cost him 200 MB to buy these things. Little 8 Chung woke up early for once, and it seemed that the girl was too excited to sleep well last night. Although she didn't have enough sleep, she was in good spirits and ran over happily when she saw Silan. Huimao didn't go out. In fact, it had learned a lot from the large and small surveillance devices in the area. Silan was just strolling around the civilian area, not entering the city, so there was no need to follow him. It also wanted to test Little Five's recent studies, and it was addicted to the feeling of being a teacher. To outsiders, the 4 little ones called Silan cousin. Silan carried Little 8 and walked on the street. It was noisy, and the old cars flying in the air would often fly over the sidewalk area without anyone stopping them. Not only that, the people in the flying cars would often throw trash at random and hit people on the sidewalk. "Sorry, you're unlucky." The repair shops on the repair street weren't high quality, and they only catered to the needs of some low-end customers. People in the city wouldn't lower themselves to come here to repair cars. Of course, it was a different story if they ran into people like Band last time. Little 8 Chung looked excitedly at the shops on the street and the flying cars flying in the air, his face flushed with excitement. He had only gone out a few times in his life. In the past, Little 3 Chung and Little 4 Chung had taken them out when they were still here, but they basically didn't go out anymore. Therefore, every time they went out, the little ones were especially excited. Everything was new. Having seen the prosperity of the city, Silan didn't have any interest in the scenery here. First, they went to the shop to buy what they needed. Silan looked at the shelves and pinched Little 8's face. "Tell me what you want to eat, I'll buy it for you." Little 8 pursed his lips and shook his head. But his eyes couldn't help but drift to the shelves. Silan sighed inwardly. Old Chung would buy snacks for the little ones, but not often. After all, there were too many things that needed money. He raised his hand to pick up some lollipops and some small biscuits, but he didn't see any fish biscuits. Then again, who would buy high-end pet snacks in this area? After settling the bill, Silan carried Little 8 in one hand and a bag in the other. Little 8 was shouting a lollipop in his mouth and eating it with relish. "Cousin, I can walk by myself." Little 8 felt bad that Silan had to carry her and carry the bag. "It's fine, Big Brother is strong." The security here wasn't very good, and he was worried about letting the child walk. A flying car was flying low just now, and half of it was in the sidewalk area. If something happened, these guys would run faster than thieves, and it would be too late for regrets. Silen was walking when his footsteps suddenly came to a halt. After Silen's footsteps came to a halt, a packaging box smashed into the ground 5 meters in front of him. The people above were littering again. As Silen walked, he told little 8 about the dangers here. Children weren't as fast as adults, and there was still a difference in their reactions. It was also more dangerous to walk here. Suddenly, there was chaos above. Silen looked up and saw that the owners of the flying cars, who had been arrogantly flying low to scare the people on the sidewalk, were now hurriedly driving their flying cars away as if they were fleeing for their lives. They were also much more obedient when flying. Silen noticed that many flying cars were directly in the air and were careful not to fly. "Cousin, what's wrong with them?" Little 8 asked crisply while licking his lollipop. "Nothing." Little 8, don't make a sound later and speak quietly. Don't be afraid, Big Brother is here. Okay. Although he didn't know what had happened, little 8 still nodded obediently. Silen walked into the sidewalk and looked up at the sky. Not long after, flying cars flew past. Looking at the flying cars, he knew who they were, the planet guards. No wonder those arrogant people just a moment ago were obediently hovering in the air, not daring to make a sound. The planet guards. Almost everyone in the area was awed when they heard the term. They were an unshakable existence. It seemed that these flying vehicles of the guard army were the vanguard. After these dozen or so flying vehicles flew past, another dozen or so flying vehicles appeared a few seconds later. Then, a large, beautiful flying car flew over, escorted by several smaller flying cars and almost 100 flying cars. This meant that the previous 2 batches of flying cars were clearing a path for them. People couldn't help but wonder, who is this big of a force? Many people who had been cowering earlier were craning their necks to look at the sky. Others couldn't see the details of the scene in the sky, but Silen could see a fire eagle emblem on the large, beautiful flying car. The Mist Bodhisattva Empire had 1 emperor and 3 kings. Apart from the ruling royal family, the other 3 kings were Fuji King, Fuji family of the Upper Tree Fuji family, Fire Eagle family of the Fire Eagle family, and Blizzard Wendiska family of the Blizzard family. There was no need to mention the Gen family. That Silen was planning his next move. Right now, it was the Fire Eagle King's men flying in the sky. The emblem on the flying car was the Fire Eagle family's unique emblem. It was even more ostentatious than the emblems on the starships or flying cars of the 4 great hunter regiments in the League of Stars. The Fire Eagle on the flying car took up too much space, as if it was afraid that people wouldn't know that it was the Fire Eagle King's men. Why would the Fire Eagle King's men come to a small place like this? Listening to old Chang's rambling, Silen learned that it was rare to see a high-ranking noble on this planet. So what was going on this time? The planet's media hadn't reported anything about this. Regardless of the status of this person in the Fuvig family, he still represented the Fuvig family's reputation. Some people saw the emblem on the flying car through their telescopic devices and shouted, "It's a fire eagle." A fire eagle. The words, "blazing eagle," immediately caused the silent atmosphere to explode. The emblem of the Fulvig family of the 3 kings. That was a high-ranking noble. What kind of concept was a high-ranking noble? Those who were called untouchables in this civilian district might not even have seen a third-class noble before, but this person was someone that a third-class noble couldn't even catch up to. A third-class noble was standing in front of them. Even if the Fire Eagle King called you a fart, you had to admit it with a smile. Third-class nobles were nothing. The guard army is nothing. Not to mention commoners. The exclamation attracted even more exclamations. The people who were hiding in their homes immediately ran out. To be able to see a fire eagle with my own eyes in my lifetime, haha, it's worth dying. Fire eagle, it's a fire eagle. Some people shouted with red faces and thick necks. Their bodies were twitching from excitement as if they were sick. The Fire Eagle King's men are here, are they recruiting people? Someone hypnotized himself. If the Fire Eagle King's men took a liking to you, even if you went to the Fire Eagle King's faction to be invisible, it would be a silent honor. Those third-class nobles and second-class nobles would have to think twice before you. But why did they have to come to this poor place to recruit people? Because the number of people surging out of the streets suddenly increased, it was almost impossible to move an inch. Thus, Silen moved further in and signaled Chang Xiaoba to cover his ears. Chang Xiaoba wasn't like other children who were frightened by the crazy people on the street and started crying. It was mainly because the lollipop in his mouth comforted Chang Xiaoba. Furthermore, Silen was still hugging him. When the little fellow heard Silen's words, she covered her ears and looked at the strange behavior of the people on the street. Are these people sick? But what made the crazy people on the street feel regretful was that the Fire Eagle King's aircraft was only passing by and soon flew further and further away from this area. Although the aircraft with the Fire Eagle emblem left, the commotion caused by the Fire Eagle King's aircraft did not subside for a long time. When Silen returned to Old Man Chang's shop, he heard many people saying that they wanted to go to the city to try their luck. If the Fire Eagle King's men took a liking to them, they would have a meteoric rise. Chapter 223. The atmosphere of the entire area changed because of the appearance of the aircraft with the blazing eagle emblem. Some of the people in the shops began to pack their things and rush to the city. This was the world here. The hierarchy was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. Many people did not have strong personal strength, but by chance, they managed to ride on the coattails of a certain aristocrat and soared overnight. It was no wonder that the people here had such a reaction. To the commoners, who did not dream of becoming rich overnight. On the other hand, Silen was calm. Originally, he was going to return to the shop directly, but after thinking for a moment, he decided to go to the spare parts shop on the next street instead. There were many crossings between the two streets, so Silen did not take a long detour. All he did was turn a corner and walk a few steps. It was different from what Silen had imagined. Because many people dreamed of being appreciated by the aristocrats, the items on display in the shop were also being packed. Some of the parts that were in a hurry to be sold were left unattended. This was Silen's goal. After comparing a few shops, Silen bought a lot of second-hand parts at a lower price. The owners of these shops wanted to sell them quickly and leave as soon as possible. They could also earn some capital to spend in the city, so Silen took advantage of them. However, when Silen was about to leave the spare parts street, there was a small dispute in one of the shops. Ha, that brother's face is messed up. Chang Xiaoba laughed as he pointed at the person who was being pushed out of the shop. Silen originally did not plan to pay attention to it, but when he heard Chang Xiaoba's words, he looked over. The person that Chang Xiaoba was talking about had traces of dark fruit juice on his face. He was not old, about 20 years old, and had a good appearance. At this moment, the young man who was pushed out of the shop was arguing with the shop owner. Didn't we agree to hire him for 30 days? It's only been 2 days, how can you go back on your word? So what if I go back on my word? I'm the shop owner, I have the final say. Besides, we didn't sign any contract, so it doesn't count. Hurry up and leave, don't be an eyesore here. The two of them argued for a while. In the end, the shop owner pushed the young man away and quickly closed the door, isolating the young man outside. The young man glared outside the door, looking a little depressed, and muttered, "Why is it so hard to find a job?" The young man turned around and looked at the other shops around him. The people who had been watching the fun hurriedly looked away and began to pretend to pack up their parts, for fear that the troublesome kid would accidentally come to their shop. Silen was about to leave when the young man looked around and his gaze landed on Silen. His originally depressed face suddenly broke into a smile. Silen lifted his leg and left. "Hey, wait, brother, don't go." That person quickly ran in front of Silen and smiled brightly, making people want to kick him. Silen didn't say anything. He just looked at the person in front of him. "Brother, you must be from one of the shops here, right?" can you do me a favor? I want to find a short-term job for about 30 days. The salary can be discussed later. I don't ask for much. I just want a place to stay and food and a place to live, the young man said. Sillin looked the man up and down. He was dressed about the same as everyone else on the street, and there was also the smell and stains of the care fluid on his body parts. However, the feeling he gave Sillin was different. He couldn't shake the feeling that this man shouldn't be here. Of course, there was no dangerous aura or malicious intent, which made Sillin feel relieved. Big flowery face, shame on you. Chang Xiaoba looked at the young man and said. However, the young man just smiled and wiped his face with his sleeve. I've let you laugh at me, little sister. I was hit by a glass of fruit juice that fell from the sky and didn't wipe it clean. It was common to be hit by fruit juice, but the young man didn't wipe his face clean, so the marks faded a little. You want to sell parts? Sillin asked. The young man's eyes lit up. He wasn't afraid of being rejected, he was afraid of not saying anything. As soon as Sillin spoke, he felt hope. I'm very familiar with parts. I've raced with people before. I repair my own car, so I'm familiar with many related parts. I've looked around. Most of the parts sold on the street are related to flying cars, so I'm quite confident. If you don't believe me, you can test me. Sillin shook his head. But I'm not selling parts. I'm from the maintenance street next door. Sillin's words made the young man's eyes light up even more. He said eagerly, that's even better. I'm experienced. If you don't believe me, you can test it too. Seeing Sillin frown and remain silent, the young man thought that Sillin was going to refuse. He put on a pitiful look and said, don't they say that people who take care of children are more soft-hearted? Sillin was speechless. Was there such a thing? Besides, even if there was such a thing, did he have to say it in front of others? Chang Xiaoba looked at the pitiful big brother in front of him, and then looked at Sillin. He didn't say anything. Grandpa had said that children shouldn't speak up when adults made decisions. Take me, take me. I'm very diligent, and I don't ask for much of a salary. I heard that a lot of it is linked to performance. I think I can do it. I'm really good at repairing cars. I also know the latest models of parts. Oh, and I've dabbled in several smart operating systems in recent years. If you don't believe me, you can test me. The young man said with an expression that said true gold feared no fire. Sillin walked around the young man and continued walking forward. Hey, brother, don't go. Think about it. You can't miss out on such an excellent labor force like me. How am I going back to the shop if I don't walk? Sillin said without looking back. When the young man heard this, he knew that he had agreed. He hurriedly caught up to Sillin and even took the initiative to help Sillin unscrew the 2 boxes of parts he had just bought. On the way back, the young man didn't stop talking. He told Sillin about the things he knew, but he didn't tell Sillin about his hometown or his experiences. Sillin didn't ask either. The young man's name was Bell. He didn't mention his surname. He asked for Sillin and Little Eight's names, and then he started talking to himself. It was the shop owner's decision whether to hire him or not. This was what Sillin had told Bell. Bell said that he would use his skills to impress the shop owner, and he was quite confident in himself. Actually, many shops wanted to hire people like Bell, but the situation was a bit special. Most people who hired short-term workers didn't have the mood to open their shops, and some shop owners didn't want to hire people who would only work for 30 days. The time was too short. Bell was still talking non-stop. He glanced at the lollipop that Little Eight was licking, then at the bag that Sillin was carrying, and then at Sillin. Sillin handed the bag over, and Bell picked a flavor that he liked without hesitation. Then, he and Little Eight started licking the lollipop, competing to see who had the longer tongue, the faster, and the better technique. Sillin regretted bringing this guy along. Why was he so stupid? When they returned to the shop, Sillin put away the things he had bought. Old Man Chung didn't immediately ask why Sillin was selling so many second-hand parts. There were some things that couldn't be said in front of strangers in Belle's presence. Sillin briefly explained Belle's situation, then took the triplets and Chung Xiaowu to distribute the snacks. Hui Mao also joined in the fun. Hui Mao was a bit disappointed when he heard that there were no fish biscuits in the shop. He reluctantly chewed on some children's biscuits to grind his teeth. As for Belle, Old Man Chung did a quick check on his skills. He was a real talent, and he was very familiar with the principles and structure of a flying car. Old Man Chung didn't hire people before because he didn't have enough money to pay them. However, Belle didn't ask for much. He said that his salary could be deducted from the commission of his performance. Plus, he only had to work for 30 days, and there was an empty house in his house. Old Man Chung really wanted to give it a shot. If it worked out, he could still try to hire people even after Belle left. Belle was very happy that he was able to stay. He rushed to finish the work that Old Man Chung was doing. Old Man Chung nodded as he watched Belle work. In the most prosperous part of the city, a few important figures of the planetary government were sitting in the lavish reception room of a tall building. Two people sat in the highest seats of the reception room. One of them had a stern expression on his face, and the other had a kind smile on his face. But no matter who they were, no one from the planetary government dared to look them in the eye. They were afraid that they'd make a mistake and anger them. There were a few guards standing around the guest hall. The guards were all wearing the same uniform with the emblem and pattern of the Blazing Eagle. These were real soldiers, soldiers belonging to the Blazing Eagle royal family. Compared to the guards on the planet, even a fool could tell who was better and who was worse. A few hours later, the people from the planetary government retreated from the reception room with their backs hunched. They only straightened up after walking a long distance and wiped the sweat off their foreheads. "Do you guys think those two really just happened to pass by and check on us?" one of them asked. The other wiped the sweat from the corner of his eyes. The two of them had played the good cop and the bad cop earlier, and they were all scared out of their wits. "Who cares? It looks like those two aren't planning to do anything to us. We just need to make sure that we don't get into any trouble in the near future." "That's true. I'll bring them back to decorate and show off the development results of our city." After the people from the planetary government left one by one, the two people in the reception room sighed at the same time. They no longer had the imposing manner they had just now. They looked at each other and lamented the helplessness in their companion's eyes. "I feel haggard again." "Sigh, why was it again?" That person's smiling face was now filled with helplessness. That person's cold face was no longer cold. He rubbed his forehead. "I really don't know what to do with him." They had flown to the civilian area just to see the progress of His Royal Highness activities. Otherwise, who would be so bored as to check on them? "We've been following behind His Royal Highness but for more than 10 years, right? Tell me, when will it end? I want to know too." The current Fire Eagle King only had one son and one daughter. Not long after his son became sensible, he expressed that he had no interest in the throne and wanted to pursue his own freedom. In the end, he was beaten up by the Fire Eagle King, but no matter how hard he beat him, he couldn't get rid of the decision he had made in his son's mind. Then, a group of people's miserable lives began. As for the right to inherit the throne of the royal family, it didn't necessarily have to be the current king's biological son. As long as they had the bloodline of Flaming Eagle Falvig, they had the right to inherit. No matter who it was, the successor had to go through a strict and long selection process. The ruler of the Fire Eagle royal family couldn't afford to make any mistakes. His son had no interest in inheriting the throne. After spurring him for so many years, he still hadn't made any progress. The current Fire Eagle King was at his wits' end. As his son grew older, it became harder and harder to pull him back. In the end, he could only give up and choose a few outstanding children to focus on nurturing. There was no need to doubt the character of the current Fire Eagle King and his consort. The Fire Eagle King was definitely an outstanding ruler, and the consort was definitely a gentle and refined person. When the consort was pregnant, she had imagined how outstanding her child would be, but it turned out to be a bucket of cold water poured over the consort's head. When he came back to his senses, his ideal daughter had already stolen bird nests, raced on flying cars, and swung a metal stick that was thicker than her to chase a 5-meter-tall bear through the forest. The son that he had high hopes for had also developed abnormally. The amount of time he had played truant in school was much more than the amount of time he had spent in school. The unreliable part of his brain would occasionally twitch and he would always do some unimaginable things. At the beginning, this prince, who had high hopes on him, had ignored the opinions of the Fire Eagle King and Princess Consort and followed the media to report on some important battlefields. Later, he had become a spy on a whim. What was strange was that with his stupid personality, the rioters did not suspect this kind of spy until the end of the battle. The rioters probably thought that a spy wouldn't be so stupid. It had to be known that at that time, the prince had been receiving higher education. Which young person of his age didn't want to get a higher education mark to pave the way for the future? The children of the royal bloodline all fought to show off, but this was how the prince had acted. Not just the current Fire Eagle King, even the former Fire Eagle King was so angry that he had destroyed several flying devices. But it was useless. In front of elders like the Fire Eagle King and the consort, the prince's perfect filtered ears could filter out the words he didn't want to hear. As for being beaten, he had gotten used to it after being beaten for so many years. His body's resistance to beatings wasn't something that people of the same race could compare to. In short, the things that this unreliable prince did made the Fire Eagle King angrier and angrier. He had punished and beaten him, but he just wouldn't turn back. The Fire Eagle King said, "Just give up on this thought." The prince, "I can't help it, my heart isn't a strip." The Fire Eagle King, after a beating incident, he had been punished. The Fire Eagle King's face was cold, only this time, no next time. However, most of the time, "this is the only time and not the next time," was nonsense. If there was a first, there would be a second, and if there was a second, there would be a third. The prince, who was lying on the ground and almost beaten to death, automatically filtered out these words. Every time His Royal Highness was forced to write a letter of repentance by the Fire Eagle King, his literary skills would improve each time. All kinds of rhetorical devices would be used, and the article that he wrote would definitely be excellent in terms of writing style, but looking at the content, it was nothing. Even if the whole article was filled with touching words of repentance, there would never be a promise like, "No next time." Just like this time, he had just finished his semester exams at school and his brain suddenly twitched. He ran to this poor place and said he wanted to experience the life of the lower class. "Experience my ass. Your Highness, you have experienced more kinds of life than all of your subordinates combined." The princess sighed 3 times a day, unable to understand. She and the Fire Eagle King, as well as the environment in the Fire Eagle royal family's territory, how could they let their children develop like this? In the end, the princess consort attributed the reason to skipping generations of inheritance. This was a problem left over from history because His Royal Highness' grandfather had a similar temperament. Because of this, when the Fire Eagle King was fighting for the throne in that generation, this old man had withdrawn early. As for the prince's actions, his grandfather raised both hands in approval. Several times, it was this old man who urged him to cooperate in the crime. Thus, the current Fire Eagle King and the former Fire Eagle King worked together to separate the old man from the prince. These two grandfather and grandson were really unconventional in the Flaming Eagle Fulvig family. If these two unconventional people worked together, wouldn't that turn the world upside down? As long as the prince didn't go to find his grandfather, the Fire Eagle King would let him do as he pleased. Thus, the two people who followed behind the prince to clean up the mess became haggard after that. The two haggard people sighed at each other, and the prince they called intermittently Twitchy was currently working with Scylla to repair their flying cars. It was just as Scylla had predicted. Since everyone was going to the city to try their luck, every family's damaged or faulty flying car hurriedly rushed over to repair it. There were also a lot of people on the repair street who had driven their flying cars to the city a long time ago, so any repair shop that was still open was doing very well. Right now, people no longer cared about the repair fees. What mattered most was the quality and speed of the repair. If they were even a second late, they would feel like they had been taken advantage of. Right now, Old Man Chang's hands were numb from receiving so many orders that his hands had turned to jelly. Right now, Silen and Belle were the ones doing most of the repairs, and Old Man Chang was only responsible for the final inspection after the repairs were completed. Silen and Belle's work was flawless, and they were even more efficient than Old Man Chang's. Silen hadn't paid much attention to speed before, so he had held back a little. But now that the orders were coming in one after another, he couldn't hold back any longer. Actually, he could go from 1 flying car per hour to 1 flying car per half an hour, but that would be too conspicuous. Silen still had some sense of propriety. Belle wasn't slow either. He repaired a flying car every half an hour, which made Old Man Chang smile happily. He'd picked up a treasure again. Silen thought that Belle could repair the ship faster than Silen, but he had the same idea as Silen. He didn't want to stand out too much and just show off a little. That was why the two of them had a tacit understanding to maintain a similar speed. There were many people waiting in line for repairs, but the line moved quickly. Many repair shops had increased their prices, but Old Man Chang's didn't. Or rather, the increase wasn't too obvious. Right now, the gray cat wasn't in the mood to discuss procedural issues with Chang Xiaowu. Instead, it was calculating today's profits with Chang Xiaowu. As the numbers grew bigger and bigger, the gray cat felt that its beloved fish biscuits were swimming towards it from not too far away. Chapter 224. Thanks to the Inferno Eagle, Old Man Chang's repair shop was raking in over 10,000 every day. One day, it even hit 30,000 at its peak. 30,000 MB wasn't much to most people in the city, but it was an astronomical sum in this area. Old Man Chang was so excited that he couldn't sleep for a few nights. At this rate, he would be able to pay for Chang Xiaowu's medical expenses. 7 days later, Old Man Chang gave Silen and Belle their salaries after dinner. Silen's salary was agreed upon a long time ago, and Belle's salary was calculated based on performance and other factors as mentioned earlier. Silen had 50,000, Belle 20,000, and Old Man Chang almost 100,000. Old Man Chang had wanted to give them a bit more, but Silen and Belle refused. Old Man Chang didn't object to the fact that he needed to save up for Chang Xiaowu's medical expenses, but Old Man Chang took care of all the food. Hui Mao licked its paws while wondering when Silen would buy some fish biscuits from the city. It was already missing that. Oh right, I noticed that we're running low on some parts today. A couple of big clients need some important parts for their flying cars these days, but I don't think we have them in this area. I think we'll have to make a trip to the city, Silen said. Hui Mao's ears perked up as it stared at Silen with sparkling eyes. Old Man Chang nodded and handed over 20,000 to Silen. Silen didn't turn it down. Old Man Chang was never one to turn down money like this. After accepting the money, Old Man Chang asked if there was anything else he needed to buy. After a moment of thought, Old Man Chang listed them all down one by one. Most importantly, he asked Silen to keep an eye on the big hospitals in the city. A full treatment cost at least 100,000 MB a few years ago, and that didn't include the recovery fees. He just didn't know how much it was now. Alright, I'll ask. Silen had recently checked on Chang Xiaowu's condition. He was a lot better after the buffering medicine. At the very least, the success rate of a full treatment project would be much higher. In addition, Chang Xiaowu had been in a good mood recently. The number of times he smiled was also increasing. This was a good sign. Then it's my turn tomorrow. Belle said eagerly as he patted Silen's shoulder. Don't worry, I'm here with you. Silen. Why does this sound so awkward? Knowing that Silen was going to enter the city, Chang Xiaoqi did not sleep at all. He was even more excited than Chang Xiaoba last time, causing Chang Xiaolu and Chang Xiaoba to be jealous. Entering the city. It seemed like they had never entered the city in their entire lives. Early the next morning, Silan carried Chang Xiaoqi and boarded the passenger flying car heading to the city. After all, Old Man Chang's family's flying car had long been dilapidated, and it would not be good for them to fly into the city. The passenger flying cars had also been overcrowded recently. They had opened up many more cars, and the price had increased again and again. However, up until now, every single one of them was full, and those who were a little slow would not even have a seat. In the past, they could squeeze as many people as they could into the cars as long as there was some space. However, the security at the city's entrance was very strict, and there were strict rules that forbade overloading. If an overloaded car was found, it wouldn't just be a matter of a fine. The car would be detained and the driver would be sentenced. Therefore, everyone was more obedient now. Many of the people on the passenger flying cars were heading to the city to try their luck. When Silan was at the repair shop, he could often hear the waiting car owners talking about the recent happenings in the city. They talked about who had gotten lucky, who had won the favor of who, and so on. Each story was more exciting than the last. Regardless of whether these rumors were true or not, there were more and more people heading to the city to try their luck. Some of the people who had been waiting to see what was going on couldn't sit still anymore after hearing the rumors. They packed up their things and ran into the city. Even the owners of the repair shops that were doing better couldn't sit still either. They closed up their shops and rushed into the city. No matter how good their business was, it was still the life of a lower-class commoner. How many generations of people had been guarding a shop in this small and poor place? If they could win the favor of an aristocrat, if they could get a chance, who would care about this small shop? Therefore, Old Man Chang's shop had made a lot of profits. He had bought a lot of spare parts and some other supplies several times at very low prices. He had earned a lot of money from Old Man Chang. Even on the bus, the topics of the passengers' conversation revolved around those few successful cases. When they talked about it, it was as if they had been there at the time. They spoke passionately, but secretly, they couldn't hide their jealousy and yearning. Chang Xiaoqi was someone who couldn't sit still. After getting on the bus, he leaned against the window and looked at the scenery outside. Even the most boring natural scenery could be watched with great interest. Look, look! That's the Star Tower, a passenger shouted excitedly. It's true, let me see. Let me see. For a moment, the passengers in the bus stopped talking about the previous topic. All of them stuck their faces to the window and looked outside. There were images on the screen, but after all, they hadn't seen it with their own eyes. Only by seeing it with their own eyes would it be something worth showing off. The Star Tower was the tallest tower on this planet. It was the landmark of the city. When one saw the Star Tower, it meant that the city was not far away. Looking at Chang Xiaoqi's face that was about to be squeezed into a big pancake, Silan smiled and rubbed Chang Xiaoqi's head. What's the hurry? You'll see it clearly in a while. Although Chang Xiaoqi responded, his small face was still squeezed outside the window. If only little 6, little 8, and 5th brother could see it. It's okay. We'll come together next time. Really? Really? Okay. Chang Xiaoqi smiled brightly. The little bit of guilt and regret he had just now was swept away. After entering the city, Chang Xiaoqi was very quiet. This was what Old Man Chang had told them before. They shouldn't talk nonsense in the city. Although he remained silent, his eyes couldn't stay still. He kept looking around. The passenger flying car was parked in a parking lot at the edge of the city. This parking lot was set up for the flying cars that came here from the civilian area. As far as the eye could see, there were people dressed similarly. It was just that there was no difference here. There were also private manors or large factories of rich families outside the city. However, those people and factories had special parking lots in the city. The conditions were much more luxurious, not as crowded and old as here. Moreover, some of the small shops around the parking lot were almost not completely from the city. Just like the customer that band introduced, they only lived at the edge of the city. Even so, they felt that compared to the civilian area, they had an absolute sense of superiority. As for the people who were completely from the city, they had always looked down on the people here. If they were passing by, they would basically take a detour. They felt that this place was full of filth and would lower their status. There were many people at the station, especially at the exit. There were people coming in and out. Silen carried Chang Xiaoqi out of the parking lot. There were no taxis in the station, and there were very few taxis around. It was as if there was a plague here. However, as long as they walked out and turned a corner, they would see more and more taxis. It turned out that these people weren't going against money. It was just a matter of face. It was as if they were afraid that others would say that they had something to do with the people here. Before he came here, Silen had inquired about the situation here. It wasn't hard to get an ID in the civilian district, so Silen only needed to spend some money to get a fake temporary ID. In any case, people without IDs were basically treated the same as people in the civilian district when they were in the city. They wouldn't carefully check a person who had a civilian identity. After the identity verification, Silen carried Chang Xiaoqi out of the station. He followed the route he had inquired about and walked a little further. After turning a corner, he saw a taxi parked there. After hailing a taxi, Silen reported a place. 300, the driver said without looking back. 300. No wonder people in the civilian area didn't dare to run to the city in the past. They couldn't afford to take a taxi here. It was only after Silen was done paying that the driver finally started the car with a look of reluctance on his face. The traffic control in the city was very strict, so it would take about an hour to reach the place, Silen said. An hour wasn't long, but it wasn't short either. Perhaps the driver was bored and found a topic to chat with Silen. Although he was the one who started the conversation, his tone wasn't very good. There was a sense of superiority in his voice. "You are also here to try your luck, right?" the driver asked with a sarcastic tone. "That's not it. I'm going to buy some spare parts. The store is short of spare parts." Regarding the driver's tone, Silen didn't seem to hear it and said with a smile. The driver was familiar with Silen. As soon as he heard Silen's words, he understood and said, "At least you know your place. You didn't get involved in this matter. Why would a noble choose someone from the civilian area?" What a joke. Silen didn't say anything. The driver then patiently explained some of the wishful thinking of the civilians outside the city after they entered the city. Silen only listened with a smile and made a sound of assent from time to time. He didn't express his own opinion, and the driver probably didn't want to hear Silen's opinion either. The flying car finally arrived at the place Silen had mentioned. It was a parts market, and for the city's upper-class citizens, this was a busy market. They didn't come here for long, and if their flying car broke down, they would just send it to the repair shop. They didn't care about the parts at all. As for those who didn't have a high standard of living, they would often buy the important parts they needed themselves. After all, it was cheaper. As for those who didn't have money, they would sometimes secretly go to the civilian area to repair. Replacing the same spare part in the city was more than 3 times more expensive than repairing in the civilian area. Perhaps the quality of the repairs in the city was guaranteed, but many people with a low income preferred cheaper repairs. Silen arrived at the parts market. This place was much livelier than the parts street in the civilian district. Just a glance from the outside was enough for him to see a lot of high-end parts. The shops were also a lot more lavish, and the prices were absolutely high. Silen mainly looked at second-hand parts. In Old Chang's shop, customers might not be willing to use first-hand parts. Seeing Silen walk towards the second-hand parts store, some people around him looked at him with disdain. One look and you can tell he's a kid from the civilian area. He doesn't have money and still wants to buy spare parts. He's just a kid who buys second-hand parts. "Hey, Why care about that? Let's talk about the last time we went to the casino. Those people's voices didn't stand out in the noisy downtown, but Silen could still hear them very clearly. For those people's words, he directly ignored them. Silen walked into a shop that sold second-hand parts. This shop wasn't particularly eye-catching among the many other shops, but if he really had to point out something special about it, the only thing he liked about this shop was the order in which the shop owner displayed the parts. Many merchants who sold parts weren't necessarily familiar with the specific usage of these parts, so the parts they displayed were arranged according to their personal preferences. However, the order in which the owner of this store arranged the parts was different. At first glance, a layman would think that the owner's aesthetic view was not good, and the order of the parts was not good. But those who were familiar with maintenance would find that these parts were arranged according to the order in which they were assembled, which also showed that the owner was really good at maintenance. When Silen walked in, the owner was immersed in drawing something. He didn't pay attention to the customers who came. Only 2 service robots that looked rough were dealing with the customers. The prices of the parts were marked, and no bargaining was accepted. There weren't many customers in the store. Compared to other stores, this second-hand parts store was a little less popular, but the owner didn't seem to care. He leaned over the table and drew. He didn't use an electronic board, but paper. Sometimes he frowned, and sometimes he smiled. A few customers originally wanted to chat with the owner, but when they saw the owner like this, they gave up the idea and left. The owner was a middle-aged man, a little stout. He didn't seem to care about the customers leaving, and he just did his own thing. Before, Silen just took a look at the arrangement of the parts outside. Now that he walked in and saw that some of the microparts had a specific order, it could be seen that the owner was a little paranoid about the placement of the parts. Silen put down Chang Xiaowu and looked at the prices of the parts he needed. They were not bad, at least not as expensive as the previous few stores. Although the previous stores were slightly more expensive, the price could be negotiated. This was only the final price, and the prices of a few parts were similar to the initial price of the other stores. No wonder the popularity of this store wasn't high. Just as Silen was looking at the parts, a few more people left the store, and finally, only Silen was left. The store was a lot quieter. Even a service robot came to serve, but it didn't introduce the functions of each part to Silen. After looking around, Silen said to the service robot, "I want the No. 3 blade of the inner spinner, the J7 primary activator, the PV5 metal contact wire." Silen said the parts he needed, and one of the robots began to pick up the parts. But when Silen said the parts he needed, the owner, who had been burying his head and minding his own business, suddenly raised his head. His eyes flashed, he laughed, put down the pen, and said, "You're an expert." The fat owner turned to the robot that was picking up the goods and said, "I'll give you a 20% discount." Silen looked at the fat owner in surprise. This was an interesting person. The fat owner walked over and looked at Silen and Chang Xiaowu, who was standing next to him curiously looking at the 2 service robots. He took out an unopened bag of candy from his pocket and handed it to Chang Xiaowu, but Chang Xiaowu swallowed his saliva and didn't take it. Instead, he looked at Silen. "Take it. This is the owner's kindness," Silen said. Only then did Chang Xiaowu take the bag of candy and said politely, "Thank you, uncle." "Ah, you're welcome." The fat shop owner chuckled and rubbed his fat belly. "I have a habit of eating sweets when I'm thinking. It gives my brain more energy to think about problems. So, every time I draw, I put a bag of sweets in my pocket. Hee hee, that's how my belly grows." Don't be fooled by the fat owner's indifferent attitude. Once you look at his words, you can tell that he's actually a lively person. Silen looked at the packaging of the bag of candy. It didn't look cheap. Maybe the price of this bag of candy was comparable to a second-hand good part. He couldn't tell that this owner had some status. The fat shop owner chatted with Silen for a bit about the parts. The shop owner's attitude towards a knowledgeable person was pretty good, and he didn't show any disdain towards Silen's frank declaration that he came from a civilian district outside the city. I know. There are some capable people in the maintenance street outside the city. My old man has a saying, geniuses are buried in the common people. Silen smiled and didn't say anything. The fat owner chatted with Silen about the maintenance of flying cars, but in the blink of an eye, he said gloomily, some of the models I painstakingly made a few days ago were smashed. Otherwise, I could have shown them to you. Maybe you could give me some inspiration. Sometimes, inspiration just likes to throw a tantrum. It doesn't come out at the critical moment. Silen felt that the fat shopkeeper was pretty special after listening to his complaints. He loved flying cars a lot, or rather, he loved designing flying cars a lot. However, his family looked down on this hobby of his. Did they send someone over to cause trouble for him and destroy the model he had painstakingly made? The only reason the shop was able to survive was because the fat shopkeeper had threatened his life with it. After the robot sorted out the parts and handed them to Silen, Silen said goodbye and left. He still had something to do. The fat owner asked Silen to visit the next time he went to the city. He might be able to see his new flying car model next time. After Silen left, he went to a big hospital in the center of the city to learn about the situation. In another building not far from the big hospital stood two people. They were the two that the heads of the planet's government had treated respectfully. That's the kid. Yes. His Royal Highness is now experiencing life in his house. Sigh, it seems that His Royal Highness is going to experience a poor life this time. It's rare for the Inferno Eagle royal family to produce such a freak who can afford to eat fine goods. Poor life? Not necessarily. According to what I know, our arrival has caused a commotion in the civilian area. Even the business of the repair shop is booming. I guess the poor and cold people won't be able to feel it. When will the people that His Royal Highness mentioned be transferred over? In a few days. Chapter 225. Silen asked a few big hospitals in the city center, but many doctors were too lazy to answer Silen's questions. When those people saw Silen, they would look at his clothes at first glance. If it was not high-end goods, then sorry, they had no time for him. If he was not from the city, then they would not even bother to pay attention to him. There were a few times when Celine didn't even open his mouth to speak, and the doctors all walked away as if they were avoiding the plague. The nurses wouldn't take a second look at you just because you were young and handsome. In a big hospital, there were plenty of rich and good-looking people that people cared about. Who cared about you? Although Chang Xiaoqi could not fully understand, he vaguely felt something. After all, children had an instinctive understanding of the eyes of adults. When he saw the eyes of the doctors and nurses, Chang Xiaoqi's original excitement and curiosity cooled down a lot, and he seemed very quiet. Silen looked at Chang Xiaoqi and did not continue to stick to his cold ass. Based on the current situation, when old man Chang came to seek medical treatment, he had received a lot of such cold treatment. So according to the experience that old man Chang had taught him, if he could not do it at once, he would directly ask the service robots. At least they would be better. Sometimes, non-humans were more approachable than humans. The distance between the hearts of humans could not even compare to that of a machine. After asking about the general situation, Silen estimated that if Chang Xiaowu's condition was to receive a full set of treatment, it would definitely not be less than 100,000 yuan. This was only the lowest configuration of treatment. The higher configuration of treatment was estimated to be 300,000 to 400,000 yuan. There was still a long way to go. After leaving the hospital, Chang Xiaoqi's state was a lot better. After all, he was a child. After seeing all kinds of new things in the city, he temporarily put the discomfort he had just felt in the back of his mind. Silen bought some things according to the items listed on Old Man Chang's list. As for Huimao's fish biscuits, they were not easy to buy. Silen looked at the pet biscuits in the pet supplies store. The quality was not good. According to Silen's understanding of Huimao, the guy would definitely not like it. So, Silen found several large stores before he was satisfied with it. It was not in the pet food category. It was for people, and it was what the small bourgeoisie liked. After buying it, Hui Mao and the little ones could eat it. Silen also went to a few communicators that were currently selling and bought a simple and cheap communicator. Right now, he wasn't in the League of Stars, so the large amount of League of Stars coins in his hands couldn't be used here. After making the purchase, Silen first contacted Old Man Chong. Old Man Chong and Belle were busy at the moment, so it was Little Six who answered the call. Silen asked about the situation in the store and if there was anything else he wanted to buy. Belle knew that it was Silen calling, so he yelled at Silen to hurry back. He couldn't handle everything by himself. After contacting Old Man Chang's store, Silen then contacted the fat shop owner of the parts market. The fat shop owner was very reluctant to see Silen leave, so he left his number with Silen and told Silen to contact him after he bought the communicator. It had to be said that the fat shop owner really thought highly of Silen. Besides, there might be a few more parts transactions in the future. The fat shop owner had given Silen a 20% discount and had even taken the initiative to contact him. This was already giving enough face, so he couldn't throw a tantrum, could he? That was called not wanting face when given face. The fat shop owner was very happy. He wrote down Silen's number and said that he would contact Silen as soon as his flying car model was finished. While Silen was making his purchases, someone had already clearly seen Silen's every move, including the person Silen was contacting. Ikiki, do you think our prince is a good person? Hasn't His Highness always been like this? Ikiki, the person who played the good cop in front of the planetary government, frowned after reading his subordinate's report. I can't believe we ran into that fatty. Which fatty? Muzo moved closer to read the report and exclaimed in surprise, so it's him. Didn't the Sizer family kidnap him? Ikiki curled his lips and said, he's a freak who's about the same as our prince. He paused for a moment before sighing, he's gotten fatter again. Silen took Chang Xiaoqi to buy a couple of children's clothes and a set for himself. Although they weren't high-end goods, at least they looked about the same as the average person in the city. This way, he wouldn't be kicked out of certain places before he could even open his mouth. Silen sighed as he looked at the balance in his hand. It was just like what Silen had heard the old people in the maintenance street say, we can't get into the city. Silen and Chang Xiaoqi had changed into a new set of clothes. Chang Xiaoqi was very concerned about her new clothes. Although she was usually active and mischievous, and her clothes were scuffed everywhere, she looked very careful after putting on the new clothes. However, she still looked very excited. Even the temptation of candy had been reduced. Silen brought Chang Xiaoqi into a fast food restaurant. Now that Silen and Chang Xiaoqi had changed into a new set of clothes, they didn't stand out in the middle of the crowd. They didn't look like they came from outside the city just by looking at their clothes, so the meal was pretty good. They didn't get rolled their eyes. The people inside the fast food restaurant were talking about the commoners coming into the city from outside the city. They were all joking with a mocking tone, but Silen could see that these people had more or less the same thoughts. It was just that they thought too highly of themselves and were deceiving others and themselves. Even Silen felt sad as he watched Chang Xiaoqi gulp down his food. Although there was a genetic restriction in the League of Stars before, the difference in treatment wasn't so great. Now, many of the people in the city couldn't compare to the people outside the city in terms of genetic level, but because their IDs showed that they were from the city, they were a cut above others. Shaking his head, Silen got rid of those chaotic thoughts and finished the food in front of him. After Chang Xiaoqi finished eating, Silen and Chang Xiaoqi set off on their way back. When they returned to the maintenance street, they saw a long queue in front of the shop from afar. Silen, come help me. My arms are so sore. Belle had just finished repairing a flying car and was about to give it a back massage when he saw Silen. He became excited and waved at him as if he had seen his savior. Chang Xiaolu and Chang Xiaoba, who had been handing parts to Old Man Chang, threw the parts away and ran out. Old Man Chang shook his head. Huh? New clothes. I've seen it before. It's a brand from the city. This brand isn't anything special in the city. It's not expensive. Even if it's not expensive, it's still from the city. The people waiting in the queue discussed among themselves. Some people who had never been to the city in their lives thought to themselves, let's go to the city after the car is repaired. Isn't it just a small amount of money? I'll harden my heart. Even if I don't get the appreciation of the nobles, I'll have something to brag about in the city. With something to brag about, I'll feel better than those who don't know anything and haven't even been to the city. When Chang Xiaolu and Chang Xiaoba heard that Silan had new clothes from the city, they looked at Old Man Chang eagerly. Old Man Chang smiled bitterly and waved his hand. Go. Thank you, Grandpa. The two kids took the bags of clothes from Silan's hands and ran upstairs. Silan handed a bag to Chang Xiaowu, who was lying on the recliner. It's yours. Go take a look. Hui Mao had already gone to eat the fish biscuits. Chang Xiaowu actually didn't have much of an emotional reaction to the new clothes. However, when he saw little 6, little 7, and little 8 going upstairs, he took the bag from Silan's hands, thanked him, and went upstairs. All right, let's get to work. Silan stretched his limbs and began the repair. It was another busy day, but also a day of harvest. At night, Hui Mao lay lazily beside Silan and licked his paws. Chang Xiaowu had already fallen asleep. During this period of teaching, Chang Xiaowu's understanding of some complex programs had satisfied Hui Mao. It was rare to meet a human with a good brain, so Hui Mao didn't have high expectations. Today's fish biscuits are not bad, Hui Mao said with a satisfied tone. Silan pinched Hui Mao's ear and flicked it. You have the nerve to say that? I worked my ass off to earn money, but that bag of food cost you a tenth of it. Hui Mao patted Silan's hand with his paw. I also contributed to this. The kid you asked me to keep an eye on really isn't simple. Oh. Tell me about it. Silan already felt that Belle was different from the others. He dressed like the people here, didn't have the arrogant attitude of the city dwellers, and acted shamelessly. At first glance, he looked more like a local. But Silan still felt that there was something off about the kid. Something very, very wrong. That was why Silan had asked Hui Mao to keep an eye on Belle on the first day Belle arrived. Both the communicator and the surveillance device were Hui Mao's eyes and ears. Belle didn't use it in front of others, but he did in private. This was one of the ways Hui Mao got to know about Belle. That kid's communicator is pretty advanced. Even the surveillance devices at the waterway might not be able to detect it. But, it can't escape my ears. Hui Mao said proudly. Yes, Master Cat, you're amazing. Silan curled his lips. This guy always liked to put himself on a pedestal. Hui Mao got to his feet and said mysteriously, do you know who that kid is? Meow, I didn't know he was hiding his strength so well. I thought he was just a local, but it turns out he's a descendant of one of the 3 royal families, the Flaming Eagle Falvig. They call him His Highness. Silan wasn't surprised because he was mentally prepared for what Weiss was going to say. However, Weeza's next words changed Silan's impression of the prince who traveled incognito to experience the life of the lower classes. That brat secretly arranged for medical staff to be sent over and even transported a batch of expensive medicine. He's prepared to secretly help Chang Xiaowu during his treatment. This was why Hui Mao's attitude toward Belle was so much better than before. He wouldn't let Belle pet his fur before, but now, he reluctantly let him. Silan nodded and scratched Hui Mao's chin in silence. Sigh, the city really isn't that great. Why do so many people want to go there? In terms of development and skyscrapers, it's nowhere near as developed as some of the planets in the League of Stars. Hui Mao couldn't understand the attitude people had toward the city. Humans really were creatures with complicated emotions. Silan smiled at Hui Mao's words. It's different here, but it's just a small planet that's not very developed. We'll know when we visit the capital of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. All right. Hui Mao narrowed his eyes and started imagining the scenery of the capital. Suddenly, Hui Mao's ears twitched and he opened his eyes. That kid is contacting the people in the city again, but they're all about you, Silen didn't interrupt Hui Mao, who was listening attentively. He must have heard something important. A while later, Hui Mao looked at Silen. You know a fatty? A fatty? Silen was puzzled. The owner of the second-hand parts shop is a fatty. I've run into a few fatties at the hospital and the mall, but that fatty is the only one I know that's special. Yeah, that's the one. They talked about the parts, but... Hui Mao stared at Silen with shining eyes. It sounds like that fatty is a noble, and a good one at that. The fat shop owner is a noble? Silen hadn't thought of that before. He thought of the maverick Prince Bell because of the Blazing Eagle incident, but the fat shop owner had stayed in the city for a few years. If he was a noble, then the people around him wouldn't have treated the fat shop owner the way they did. This meant that the fat shop owner was also a person who hid his strength well. What's his background? Silen asked. Hui Mao didn't answer Silen's question immediately. Instead, he grinned at something and said, that fatty has a lot of embarrassing things, Silen. According to the people over there, the fatty's family, the Sizer family, is a great noble. Every once in a while, they would tie him up like a pig and bring him back home at night. His family almost razed his shop to the ground a couple of times. Oh, wait, they almost razed the entire parts market. Silen knew a bit about the Sizer family. He had seen it on TV before. A family name that could be heard even in a small place like this meant that this noble family had a lot of influence in the entire Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Even if it couldn't compare to the Emperor and the Three Kings, it was still not something a small noble could compare to. Also, the fact that the Sizer family had sent people all this way to kidnap him meant that the fat shop owner's status in the Sizer family wasn't low. There are crouching tigers and hidden dragons in this small place. Hui Mao's eyes lit up. Of course. We're the ones who killed star rank hunters. Silen. I didn't say, we. 3 days later, Silen received a call from the fat shop owner while he was repairing his flying car. The fat shop owner sounded very excited as he showed off his new flying car model and urged Silen to enter the city to study it. Silen said while repairing his flying car, I don't have time. I've been busy earning my living expenses lately. Why don't you come over yourself? Originally, Silen was just saying it. Who would have thought that the fat shop owner would actually come over? The fat shop owner might look like a careless person, but he was actually a meticulous person. There was no way he could design those high-precision flying cars otherwise. When Silen saw the fat owner of the shop, the fat man was getting off a rather shabby old 2-passenger flying car. The corner of Silen and the others' eyes twitched when they saw the fat man squeezing out of the relatively narrow car door while taking up 2 people's space. Sigh, who's this fat man? I don't think I've seen him before. With Fatty's physique, if he stood in the crowd, it would be hard for people not to remember his bloated body that was 2 heads taller than him. Therefore, the car owners in line looked at each other and asked, Hey, Old Chang, is he from the city? Old Chang was also puzzled. He didn't know this person. Silen greeted the fat shop owner and said to the others, he's a friend from the city. In the eyes of the people, having a friend from the city was absolutely rare and enviable. So what if he had been to the city? He still had friends in the city. At the same time, the people's desire to enter the city grew even stronger. It was estimated that the next day, there would be news that a silly kid had met a friend from the city after entering the city, and the friend had specially come from the city to see him. The triplets worked together to move a big chair for the fat shop owner, but when the fat shop owner sat down, they couldn't help but worry if the chair could withstand the fat shop owner's weight. Hui Mao squatted on the high platform and looked down at the people below. Damn, these 2 nobles don't even know each other. The fat shop owner saw that both Silen and Bell were busy, so he didn't disturb them. Instead, he just watched from the side. Others might think that Sillin and Belle were skilled in their maintenance, but the fat shop owner was an expert in this field. His eyes glowed and he was overjoyed. Who would have thought that there would be a capable person like Sillin and another capable person here? He had never seen such experts in the city before. Now that he had met two of them, this trip was definitely worth it. The triplets felt a chill run down their spines when they saw the fat on the fat shop owner's face jiggling. They all took a step back. Noticing that the triplets were avoiding him, the fat shop owner put on a kind smile and asked, "Little friends, do you like flying cars?" Although he didn't know what the fat shop owner's goal was, who wouldn't like flying cars? The triplets nodded in unison. The fat on the fat shop owner's face became even deeper because of his smile. He took out a palm-sized device and fiddled with it for a bit, then looked at the flying car parked outside. The triplets also looked over, and when they saw it, they almost drooled. The windows of the shop owner's car opened automatically, and 4 mini flying cars the size of an adult's palm flew out. Each of them flew in front of Little 5, Little 6, Little 7, and Little 8. Flying car toys. The eyes of the people lining up outside lit up. Look, their friends from the city even brought flying car toys. That was a flying car toy that could actually fly. It couldn't be sold in this area. With Sillin's nod and Old Man Chang's permission, the 4 finally got on the flying car. It wasn't just the triplets. Little 5 was quite fond of the toys as well. The more he came into contact with programs, the more fascinated he became with machines, not to mention this kind of toy that had very high requirements for parts and programs. The door of the flying car popped open, revealing a card slot inside. They followed the fat shop owner's instructions and took out the card. After taking it out, the small card unfolded until it was about the size of the device in the fat shop owner's hand. There were many buttons on the thin layer of metal, and the children could control the flying car toys by manipulating these buttons. With the flying car toys, the triplets weren't afraid of the fat shop owner whose fat jiggled when he laughed. They happily played with the flying car. Chapter 226. The shop owner had originally planned to wait until the shop closed, but who knew that there would be so many people here today that there would be a long queue outside until evening. Eventually, the shop owner figured out that these people were all here to see him. He'd come here on a whim and ended up being the center of attention. Even though he'd been in the auto parts market for a few years, he still couldn't understand the feelings of the people in the civilian district. Still, he didn't mind being watched. It was all an advertisement for Old Man Chang's repair shop. Just as Fatty expected, a lot of people came here because of him. In this place, if anyone had a relative or friend in the city, it was definitely something to be envied and hated. In addition, the flying car toy that Fatty took out for a few kids to play with had spread throughout the entire maintenance street. People from the neighboring streets also came over. Old Man Chung didn't know whether to say it or not. He had to answer the same question several times every time he accepted a job. At the same time, Old Man Chung was thinking, if he had a relationship with someone from the city, wouldn't Chung Xiao's treatment be easier? Old Man Chung was a stubborn man. He stayed in the shop until the shop closed for the night. After dinner, the fatty called Sillin and Belle over to give him their opinions on his flying car model. Other than the 4 flying car toys he had given to the 4 children, Fatty also had 3 flying cars. These 3 flying cars looked similar to the 4 he had given them, but in essence, they were completely different. These 3 flying cars were the result of Fatty's painstaking efforts during this period of time. Old Man Chang was old, and he had been working overtime for the past few days, so he didn't have the energy to participate in the discussion at night. Moreover, Old Man Chung knew exactly what he was capable of, and after observing them for a while, he realized that both Belle and Sillin were experts. What they usually did wasn't even their full strength. Looking at the flying car model in his hands, Sillin opened the door and took a look inside. He studied every part of the car. A tricycle flying car. It was only when Sillin held it in his hands that he realized that the so-called flying car toy was actually a miniature version of a flying car. If it was enlarged to the size of a regular flying car, it would be a tricycle luxury flying car. The materials, parts, circuits, combinations, etc. were all top-notch. Calling it a toy was an understatement. That's right, this is the model of the three-limbed flying car that I designed. Fatty was very proud of his shooting. Belle didn't look as closely as Sillin did, but he did agree with the design of the flying car. The exterior design of this flying car isn't flashy at all. It looks rather low-key. Indeed. If you only look at the surface of this flying car, you won't be able to tell the difference between it and other flying cars. Only by looking at its internal structure will you know what it is. Fatty smiled and nodded. He looked at the flying car like he was looking at his own child. Belle got goosebumps when he saw the look on the fat man's face. No wonder your son doesn't want to kiss you. It's because you're putting all your fatherly love into the flying car. There were a lot of people who liked to put speed first when designing or modifying flying cars, but Fatty's design told Sillin that he prioritized safety first, followed by all other performance. The three-limbed flying car was more of a test for the designer, but Fatty had the ability to do a better job. At the very least, this was one of the two flying cars that Sillin could give him the highest praise. The flying car he'd seen in Yudo's hometown was nowhere near as good as this one. The only one that could compare was Lung's, but the style of the two was different. In terms of price, Lung's was definitely more expensive, but in terms of practicality, the two were about the same. The safety factor was also quite high. Belle turned the flying car around in his hands and smirked. How's this car's resistance? As he spoke, Belle wrapped his hands around the flying car. Then, he twisted. Screech. An ear-piercing sound rang out. The surface of the mini flying car was almost twisted, but if one looked closely, they would find that there was a small life-saving bag wrapped around the seat of the mini flying car. The twisted body of the car did not twist the life-saving bag. If it was the real size, the people inside should be safe. Not bad. Belle placed the twisted flying car on the ground. Soon, the twisted car began to return to its original state. 2 minutes later, the flying car was almost back to its original state. The supermemory composite material. He checked the operating system and found that the emergency system was fully functional. Then there's nothing else to say. Fatty, do you have any other requests? Belle looked at the fat owner. The fat owner scratched the buzz cut on his head. I think it's good enough, but to be sure, I need to take it apart and reassemble it. That way, it'll be easier to understand. If it's the same series of flying cars, there will be some differences. Even if it's a three-limbed flying car, the focus of each series will be different. Sillin and Belle understood. So you're saying that you want us to help you dismantle and reassemble the flying car? It's like this. It took me a lot of effort to assemble this car, and I even used a few robots, but I still feel that manual labor is better. Sillin fiddled with the little flying car in his hands, trying to get a feel for its structure. Aren't you afraid that we'll ruin your hard work? No. Wait here, I'll go get the tools first. They're still in the car. The fat owner chuckled as he ran off to get the toolbox. Belle picked up the flying car that he had twisted into a twist and then returned to its original form. He picked up the tools on display and began to dismantle it. These tools were used to repair normal flying cars, but the fact that he was able to use them as if they were professional tools was a testament to Belle's skill in using them. Belle looked up and stared at Sillin while he was resting the car's shell. Then, he lost his cool. There were already parts lying around Sillin's hands, and Sillin had already begun dismantling the core components. But the problem was, Sillin didn't even use any tools. Belle watched as Sillin swiped his hand across the machine's surface, and the parts fell to the ground as if they had come on their own. The fat owner stared at Belle with the toolbox in hand, the fat on his face twitching uncontrollably. He'd already found it hard to believe that Belle was dismantling the flying car with the tools that were used to repair big things, but who would have thought that there was someone even better? Belle stopped dismantling the car. Like the fat owner, he stared at Sillin without blinking. Mo Heng had once described Sillin's dismantling of the machine as a work of art, and he wasn't exaggerating at all. Laymen would find it miraculous, but those who knew the ropes would find it heaven-defying. Was this even human's hand? Was this something a human could do? Hui Mao, who was sprawled lazily on the rack, yawned as he watched the three of them. Pfft, what a fuss. When Sillin was done dismantling the car, Belle looked at the time. What the hell? 10 minutes. Belle would have taken at least half an hour to completely dismantle the flying car, wouldn't he? That was an extraordinary performance, but why did this kid seem to be able to complete it so easily? After Sillin finished dismantling the car, the first thing Belle and the fat owner did wasn't to look at the disassembled parts. Instead, they each took one of Sillin's hands and examined it carefully. He looked at it carefully and pinched it again, as if he wanted to take another bite. Sillin pulled his hand back and punched each of them. Belle scratched his head. It's no different from my hand. How did you do it? Just like that. Sillin didn't explain either. He pointed at the separated parts and began to explain, if it's divided into several series, then the rotating blades will definitely be different. The ratio of rotating blades to propellers in the air is slightly larger, and the proportion of materials that can resist water pressure is too large. Therefore, the more aquatic series will definitely lag behind the more aerial series in the air. Sillin drew their attention to the flying car and began discussing the different configurations of the different series. The fat owner stopped worrying about Sillin's hand and started taking notes. By the time the three of them were done talking, the sky was already bright. There was already a line of people waiting outside to open the door and place their orders. Fatty rubbed his numb legs and carefully placed the reassembled flying car into his own flying car. The 3 flying cars he had assembled were different from the ones he had assembled before. Each of them had a different focus and belonged to 3 different series of the same type. There were a few series that had not been assembled due to a lack of materials. However, the designs had already been drawn. The fat owner rummaged around in his pocket and took out a card. It was a common memory card of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Only 1% of the population on this planet owned one. The rest of the population only used the internal memory cards of the planet. The fat owner handed the card to Sillin a little embarrassedly. This is all I have. I don't have any extra money on me right now. Split it with Belle as payment for your help. Don't say no, I'll feel bad if you do. You guys deserve more. I'll make it up to you in the future. Sillin took the memory card and swiped it with his finger. A string of 7 digits appeared on the surface of the card. It was almost 1,000,000 MB. Sillin knew that the fat owner didn't lack money. After all, the fat owner was a member of a great noble family, and his status wasn't low either. Belle knew this even better, so Sillin didn't refuse the fat owner's offer. He needed money right now. Old Man Chang had already woken up and made breakfast. Sillin gestured to the old man that he didn't need to rest. Old Man Chang sighed and prepared to open the shop, but the fat owner stopped him. One more thing. The fat owner looked at Old Man Chang and Sillin. What do you think of my shop, Sillin? It's okay. Are you interested in taking over? Old Man Chang didn't say anything. He was sure that he would regret it if Sillin took over the fat owner's shop. After all, he would be the only one left to work. Sillin waved a hand. I don't have time. Hey, don't be in such a hurry to turn me down. I think I'll be leaving soon, and it'll be a waste if I'm gone for a long time. I'd like to give it to you as a gift, but it'd be even better if you could reserve a room for me. I'll probably have to come back here occasionally in the future. Seeing that Sillin wasn't saying anything, the fat owner added, you don't have to pay for it. I can give it to you after all the paperwork is done. This way, your ID will show that you're a citizen of the city. It's a great benefit, and I won't care who you sell the shop to in the future. What do you think? The fat owner glanced at Old Man Chung while saying this. His meaning was clear. If you don't want to run the shop after you take over, then give it to this family. Why wouldn't you want such a great benefit? Is the shop big? Belle looked very interested. If it's big, I'll be able to freeload there more often in the future. It's 5 times bigger than this place. It's at the parts market, the fat owner said. Although the shop wasn't big in the parts market, it was still much bigger than Old Man Chang's. Okay. Do I need to do any paperwork? Sillin asked. The fat owner was very happy that Sillin was willing to take over his shop. He quickly waved his hand. No need, no need. I'll bring some paperwork over tomorrow. You can pack your things. We'll talk after the paperwork is done. For now, the business needs to continue. The fat owner didn't stay for breakfast. He left in a hurry. The people waiting in line outside were all talking when they saw the fat owner come out. Look, it's that fat owner from the city. That fat owner stayed the night. Looks like they're pretty close. Yeah, Old Man Chung and the others are really something. Old Man Chung wasn't in the mood to think about the people talking about him. His mind was a mess. After another busy day, Sillin discussed his idea with Old Man Chung during dinner. Sillin himself wouldn't be staying on this planet for long, so if he left the shop to Old Man Chung to manage, he would have a place to settle down in the future. Also, this way, Old Man Chung and his family's identification could be changed to citizens of the city. With this change, they'd be able to get better treatment at the hospital. The treatment at the hospital depended on the person. Well, Sillin. Old Man Chung felt a little guilty. You saved my life and Weeza's. Without you, I might have been left to fend for myself in space. Also, Little Five needs to get treated as soon as possible. That's when the chances of success are the highest. Belle didn't ask for the money for Carrie's noodles. He said that he didn't help much and that Sillin was the one who did all the work. There was something that Belle didn't say, but Sillin understood. How could a prince of the royal family lack money? $1 million was probably less than the price of a flying car for them. The next day after Sillin and Old Man Chung came to an agreement, he didn't open the shop for business. Instead, he planned for Little Five's treatment. However, the fat shopkeeper didn't show up. Instead, it was a young man in his 20s. The young man looked like he came from an extraordinary background. Be it his attire or his temperament, he was far superior to the common folk in the city. Sillin thinks that he was Tsijiu. However, this man was a lot more reserved than Tsijiu, unlike Tsijiu, who always showed off his arrogance and dominance. The car the young man was driving was quite eye-catching in the area. It was obvious that it was expensive. As soon as he stopped in front of the shop, the people who were gathered there immediately gave way. Which one of you is Sillin? The young man asked. The tone of his voice was that of someone in a high position who often gave orders. However, when his eyes landed on Belle, his gaze paused for a moment. It was different from the way he looked at the others. I am. Sillin stepped forward. The young man didn't say anything else. He took out a file and tossed it to Sillin. This is the transfer document for the shop. All the paperwork has been completed. Here's your new identification card. Sillin opened the bag and confirmed that everything had been done. Logically speaking, a single day was definitely not enough time to complete an ID, let alone an ID that was transferred from outside the city to inside the city. It would take at least half a year to complete. It was easy to get things done with power. After tossing the file to Sillin, the young man didn't want to stay any longer. Before he left, Sillin asked, "Where's the shopkeeper?" The young man didn't even look back as he walked towards the flying car. He went home. This meant that the young man was a relative of the fat shopkeeper. If the fat shopkeeper was a little thinner, he would look a lot like this young man. It was rare that the shop wasn't open for business today. Silen and Belle went to the city and saw that the shop was in good condition. However, the rooms inside were all empty. Not a single bedroom had anything in it. He's really gone. Belle knew that his son had forcefully kidnapped the fat man and brought him back to the mansion. So, should we move in tomorrow? As soon as possible. Silen didn't return immediately. Instead, he bought some furniture. The layout of this place was similar to Old Man Chang's. It was a shop on the ground floor, and a house on the top. However, this place was much bigger. After buying the furniture and decorating the bedrooms, there were kitchen tools that hadn't been moved away, so there was no need to buy new ones. Judging from the fat shopkeeper's appearance, the kitchenware hadn't been used much. They were clearly from 2 years ago, but they looked brand new. At the very least, Old Man Chang's family would be a lot safer here. Silen didn't believe that the old foxes of the planetary government didn't know what was going on here. However, the fat shopkeeper from the Sizer family was only part of the picture. The bigger picture was yet to come. Who would dare touch this shop when a member of the royal family, one of the 3 kings, was here? When Silen and Belle returned, Old Man Chang looked very excited. It wasn't because of the shop, but because of Chang San and Chang Si. Chang San and Chang Si had received an acceptance letter from a famous school on another planet. They were officially accepted after passing the adaptation period. It was no wonder that Old Man Chang was so excited. The fact that they were accepted meant that Chang San and Chang Si's development was no longer limited to this small planet. They had much more room to grow and see the wider world. It was a double blessing. They had contacted the hospital where Chang Xiaowu was being treated. Old Man Chang felt that there was something wrong with the hospital. It wasn't that the hospital wasn't good, but that it was too good. This puzzled Old Man Chang a lot. But the most important thing right now was to treat Chang Xiaowu. Little Five's illness could be dealt with later. Belle had already taken care of everything at the hospital. The people involved would put in more effort as well. Old Man Chang would stay in the hospital for now. He would return to the shop after Little Five had fully recovered. Silen and Belle were the ones who took care of the shop. Belle was sitting inside the shop and checking the time. It was almost a month now. Sigh, it's so damn fast. Chapter 227. Although they had a new shop, the old one in the civilian district was still unsold. They would have to wait for old Chang's return to decide what to do next. Right now, Chang Xiaowu was recovering from his full surgery. Silen would replace him every 2 days so that Old Man Chang could rest a little longer. Pets were prohibited in the hospital, but Hui Mao was openly chewing fish biscuits and chatting away with Chang Xiaowu. The doctors and nurses acted as if they were blind and didn't notice him at all. Every time Silen went to visit Chang Xiaowu, he would bring the triplets with him. This way, he would be able to relax and recover faster. Silen, did you do what happened to Xiaowu? Old Chang asked Silen outside the ward. Previously, he had been suppressing it in his heart. Now that he saw that Chang Xiaowu's recovery was going well, one of his many years of worry had finally been resolved. Now that he thought about it, he also wanted to clarify this matter. Silen looked at the 4 kids in the ward and replied, "No, I only paid part of the money. As for the rest, I don't have the ability to do that." Old Chang frowned. Then, is it that fat shop owner from last time? Nope. Silen shook his head. Old Man Chang was really puzzled. He was just a lower-class commoner and did not know any nobles. Otherwise, he would not have delayed Chang Xiaowu's illness for so long, and first brother Chang and second brother Chang would not have died so early. Silen, tell me. Let this old man have a goal to repay. Silen smiled. This is really nothing to him. He's not even interested in the $1,000,000 Fatty gave me. When Silen said this, old Chang thought of Belle, who was staying in the shop to look after it. He was so shocked that he was tongue-tied. It's Belle? Yes, but it's better to keep it a secret. He doesn't want too many people to know. I understand that, Old Man Chang said with a sigh. If that was the case, then he must be a noble. Who would have thought that the young man who worked in the civilian district was a noble? People were right. A noble's thoughts couldn't be judged with common sense. Otherwise, why would he go to such a poor place to suffer instead of being a noble? Belle was completely unaware of the conversation between Silin and old Chang. However, he didn't care if Silin and the others found out about Chang Xiaowu. The month was almost up, and it was time for him to leave and search for his next target. Belle yawned. The 2 service robots were enough to sell the parts. He was just taking a nap and thinking about his future plans. He wouldn't go back even if he was beaten to death. It wasn't easy for him to wander this far, so he had to experience it to his heart's content. Otherwise, if he was caught by his father, it would be difficult for him to come out again. He wasn't like that fatty Sizer Fleeka. Fleeka was the chief designer and senior manager of a huge family business, so it was only a matter of time before he was kidnapped. Belle, on the other hand, was empty-handed. Freedom was a goddamn good thing. Regardless of whether Belle's concept of freedom was correct or not, right now he was indeed as carefree as that fat beaver Laika. Belle couldn't think of a good place to go. His 2 friends were busy with their own things. Emin, Olaganyuo sacrificed himself for his brother and didn't escape. As for Zhen Xingming, needless to say, that bastard was definitely flirting with girls. At that time, when the 3 of them had made up their minds to escape, according to the usual practice, they had to draw lots to choose who would bring up the rear. Thus, Olaganyuo, the unlucky one, had to bring up the rear. Sigh, this child's luck was really bad. Before he could escape, he was dragged back by his father and thrown into the army for training. He was told that he couldn't be sloppy, and that he needed to have a strong willpower. Willpower my ass, even if that fellow was trained 1,000 times, he still wouldn't be able to stand properly or sit properly. While Belle was deep in thought, Silin had returned with the 3 little ones. Silin spent 100,000 RMB to buy a flying car for ease of travel in the city. This kind of flying car was considered a common car in the city, and those who were slightly better off would buy a higher grade one. However, there was no way it could compare to Silin's car in terms of safety. Silin's flying car was modified by him, and it was much safer than before. Every time he visited Chang Xiaowu at the hospital, Silin would drive the triplets there. This way, he wouldn't have to fight for a taxi. Is Xiaowu alright? Belle asked. Judging from Silin and the others' expressions, Chang Xiaowu should be recovering well. He's doing well. The 3rd recovery stage has begun, and he should be able to leave the hospital in 5 days. Silin said after he parked the car. Have you decided on your future plans? Silin asked when he saw Belle's worried face. Of course I am. Belle rubbed his chin like a resentful wife. Silin pursed his lips and ignored him. He went to organize the spare parts. Although he had taken over Fatty's spare parts shop, there was still space in the shop. If he wanted to sell spare parts, 2 service robots would suffice. Furthermore, Chang Han would probably be bored out of his mind when the time came, so he cleared out a space to be used as a repair point. From time to time, he would be able to accept 2 repair orders. Of course, the final decision was still up to Old Man Chang. Silin only cleared out the space. Hey, Silin, what are you going to do? Stay here and look after the shop for them. Belle came over and asked. Even though he hadn't known Silin for long, Belle believed that Silin wouldn't stay here forever. Silin drank a glass of water and said, I don't have anywhere else to go. This is the only place I can stay. But once Xiaowu's condition stabilizes, I'll leave and visit Chang 3 and Chang 4 on their behalf. After we moved here, Old Man Chang contacted Chang 3 and Chang 4 and told them the address and contact number of the new shop. The signal was much better in the city, and the video chat was much smoother. Both Chang Little 3 and Chang Little 4 had seen Sillin and the gray cat in the video before. The cost of interplanetary communication wasn't something ordinary people could afford, so in order to save money, they would only contact each other once every 30 to 50 days. As for those who didn't get along with their families, they wouldn't contact each other even once in a few years. After their living conditions improved, Old Man Chang couldn't wait to contact each other every few days. If it wasn't for Chang Xiaowu, Old Man Chang would have stayed by his communicator every day. But now that he had gotten his new ID, it was time to update some of Chang 3 and Chang 4's information and mail the relevant documents to them. Sillin planned to bring them along with him when the time came. Okay. Belle's eyes lit up. I'll go with you and see if there are any good job opportunities. I heard Little 3 and Little 4 are studying at a famous school in this star region. Their names are Papa Tuo or something. Sillin said. It's Baron Bato. As expected, the so-called top 10 middle schools in the 23rd star region were nothing but a pile of shit in the prince's eyes. Inside the tall building at the center of the city, Muzo rubbed his eyes. Ikeki, my eyelids keep twitching. Do you think our prince is up to something again? Ikeki didn't answer, but he looked like he was constipated. Based on their understanding of the prince over the years, the appearance of similar symptoms meant that the prince was about to start a new experience. 5 days later, Celine drove a flying car to pick up Chang Xiaowu and Old Man Chang. After treatment, Chang Xiaowu's complexion was no longer as sickly as before. After he had fully recovered, he could run and run like a normal child. Sometimes, being naughty was a luxury. At least, Chang Xiaowu had never experienced it in his life. However, Chang Xiaowu didn't seem to be a fan of strenuous exercise. In the future, his goal was to strengthen his body. His main focus was on programming. With Huemao's guidance, Chang Xiaowu's understanding of mechanical programming was even deeper than some so-called experts. In the past, he didn't have the physical strength to support his desire, but now that he had a healthy body and his family's financial situation had improved, he was able to solve more new and interesting machines in the city. Just as he planned, Sillin prepared to go out for a while. Before he left, Old Man Chang took everyone to talk to Chang Xiaowu and Chang Xiaowu on another planet. Both Chang Xiaowu and Chang Xiaowu were very happy that Chang Xiaowu had recovered. Old Man Chang gave Sillin 100,000 MB and asked Sillin to pass it to Chang Xiaowu and Chang Xiaowu. It was said that one should only report the good news when they were away from home, and Chang Xiaowu and Chang Xiaowu were precocious to begin with. Even if they were wronged, they wouldn't tell their families. However, Old Man Chang felt sad when he saw that the two children had lost even more weight. He was still smiling during the call, but tears were streaming down his face after the call. Right now, Old Man Chang only had 120,000 MB in his hands. He didn't ask Sillin to pay for Chang Xiaowu's treatment in full. The shop had stabilized anyway, and the 20,000 MB he had was more than enough to support him and the children's daily lives. Sillin wasn't worried about the shop either. After all, the great nobles had given them a heads up, and they would take care of the planetary government from the shadows if anything happened. 2 days had passed since Belle's original 30 days, but he still stayed behind and waited for Sillin to set off with him. He wanted to see the schools that were different from the ones in the imperial capital. In fact, he was thinking of finding a free job at the school and reminiscing about his youth. No one doubted Sillin's new identity. It was a proof of identity personally made by a great noble, and there was no way it could be faked. This way, Sillin wouldn't have to worry about his identity no matter where he went. It was a good thing. Therefore, Sillin, the Grey Cat, and Vilal left this inconspicuous little planet in the vast star region. They headed for a relatively well-developed area in the 23rd star region of the Empire, and that was where the Baron Bader Intermediate Education School was located. On the same day that Sillin and Belle left, Flaming Eagle Fulvig's people also left the planet to chase after their prince. Without a personal spaceplane or a starship, Sillin and Belle had no choice but to buy tickets and board a passenger starship. As for Wheeze, it had already found a place to sleep, and it would only come out when it reached its destination. It didn't want to be locked up with those stupid pets. Once again riding on a passenger starship, Scylla thought back to the time he met Dias. Things were still the same, but he was no longer the man. He wondered how the League of Stars was doing. There was bound to be chaos after Osculos's death, but it was hard to say how big or small the chaos would be. Bell looked very excited. He had experienced many different kinds of life, but it wasn't common for him to ride a passenger starship like this. Of course, Muzo and Ikiki wouldn't let him ride alone. Scylla could sense that there were a couple of people watching them from inside the cabin at all times. It was Bell, but the prince didn't seem to notice them at all. He kept talking to himself while flipping through the star map of this star region, trying to learn more about Balin Bator and see if there were any ideal positions for him to take. The Mist Bodhisattva Empire's star region wasn't as big as a single star region in the League of Stars, but the number of habitable planets here wasn't any smaller than a single star region in the League of Stars. If the League of Stars was divided into 3 upper star regions, 10 free trade zones, and 13 backward star regions, then the Mist Bodhisattva Empire's star regions weren't divided like that. Although some star regions were more developed than others, there weren't too many differences in development between star regions other than the imperial capital and the Three Kings' main forces. In fact, the gap between the rich and the poor in each star region was huge. Scylla had already experienced this kind of strict hierarchy when he was on that small planet. The planets around Baron Bader Intermediate were doing very well. At the very least, Old Chang's planet couldn't compare. These planets were about as developed as some of the planets in the League of Stars' 10 free trade zones. Baron Bader Intermediate Education School was one of the top 10 middle education schools in the star region. It wasn't a higher education school, so it couldn't reach the scale of a higher education school. Even so, Baron Bader Intermediate Education School only took up a tenth of the star region's star region. The fact that a school could take up a tenth of the star region was a testament to its status. That was why the planet was named Planet Baron Bader. When Scylla and Bell walked out of Baron Bader Intermediate's port, Hui Mao had been crouching on top of a lamppost waiting for them for a long time. Bell had seen Hui Mao's uniqueness many times. He still had claw marks on his arm from when he fought Hui Mao for fish biscuits. It's easy to find Baron Bader Intermediate Education School. It's a little far from the central port, but there's a direct train to the school, Bell said happily. He had already done his research on the transportation system. After filling their stomachs at a restaurant near the port, they boarded the train to Baron Bader Intermediate Education School. Bell was happy to start planning a new goal, but Muzo and Ikech were itching to punch the ground. Their prince wanted to take up an idle position here, so the order he gave them was to keep a low profile. What did it mean to keep a low profile? As nobles, even if they wanted to keep a low profile, they didn't like to hide. Bell, of course, was an exception. After some discussion, Muzo and Ikech decided to stay in Baron Bader Intermediate Education School for a while under the pretext of selecting talents with potential. As for the number of talents with potential that could be selected, or if not a single one could be selected, it would depend on the strength of the students in Baron Bader. If you could satisfy Muzo and Ikiki, congratulations, child. You've struck it rich. If you're not satisfied, even if the principal of Baron Bader and the head of the planet's government came to curry favor with you, I'm sorry, I'm not happy. I won't accept you even if you lick my feet. It wasn't that easy to enter the circle of Blazing Eagle royalty. It had to be said that the logo of the Blazing Eagle was too crazy. The moment the logo of the Blazing Eagle appeared, the people from the planet Baron Bader government began to take action. The teachers and students of the Baron Bader school smelled blood and began to show their best side. The planet's attention was instantly drawn away by Muzo and Ikech. In comparison, Bell and the rest of the people looked pretty mundane. If it was before, the people on the bus would have asked if you were new and why you came to Baron Bader Intermediate Education School. But today, everyone was talking about the same thing. They heard that the Blazing Eagle royalty had arrived, and there were rumors, and there were rumors, and there were rumors, and there were rumors, Scylla was puzzled. The blazing eagles had only just arrived, didn't they? Were they already on steroids in just a short while? He had to admit that Scylla had underestimated the charm of the royalty. Scylla looked at the man beside him who was drooling while sleeping with his eyes closed, and who was chuckling stupidly. He couldn't tell what he was dreaming of, and Scylla was starting to understand the feelings of the people following behind the prince a little. Scylla had never received a proper intermediate education, and he hadn't even finished the higher education he received at Seven Lights. That was why Scylla was a little curious when he saw the situation inside Baron Bader Intermediate Education School. It was an intermediate education after all, and the students inside the school were between 10 and 20 years old. Most of the boys and girls were around 15 to 16 years old. It was the age of unrest. There was a uniform in the school, unlike in higher education, where there was freedom of dress. However, even if they wore the uniform, there was still a big difference between rich and poor students. As far as the eye could see, some of the girls had jeweled hairpins on their heads, glittering necklaces around their necks, and various patterns decorated their fingernails. On the other hand, some of the students appeared very plain. They did not have colorful hairpins or jeweled necklaces. Perhaps it was because they had been bullied for a long time that they did not dare to look others in the eye. That being said, there were also some students from poor families who chose a different style, just like the ones in front of them. The moment Scylla and Belle walked into Baron Bader Intermediate's campus, they immediately witnessed a battle between the rich and the poor. The two groups of people looked at each other in disgust. One side was biased towards individual combat power, while the other was biased towards the equipment they carried. There were a lot of hecklers around them, and some of the teachers were already used to this kind of situation. They could even recognize the name of the leading student. The school's security guards didn't rush forward to stop the fight immediately. They were probably waiting for the fight to be over before stopping it. Scylla and Belle weren't in a hurry to find Chong Little 3 and Chong Little 4 either. The two simple-mindedly found a shady spot to sit down and enjoy their drinks while watching the fight. Chapter 228. Holy shit, that kid actually broke the KJ-350 composite gun in half. Belle commented from time to time as he watched the fight with great interest. Scylla didn't say anything, but he was also paying attention to the discussions around him. Most of the time, the information provided by the bystanders was far better than the information provided by the main character. It didn't take long for Scylla to figure out why the two sides were fighting. It was because of the noble Blazing Hawk. When the Blazing Hawk Falvig's men arrived on the planet, everyone on the planet knew about it through the advanced communication network. Everyone on the planet was already on the move. Be it the lesser nobles who wanted to curry favor with the Blazing Hawks or the commoners who craved recognition, they were all making preparations. Of course, Baron Bader Academy paid close attention to this news, so the students were already asking around for information. Because of the arrival of the Blazing Eagles, the competition between the two sides became even more intense. The nobles said that the commoners were delusional, but the commoners quickly retaliated. In the last semester's comprehensive rankings, more than 60% of the top 100 were commoners. This was a disgrace that the noble students had always felt. In the end, the two sides started fighting. A closer look would reveal that both sides were holding back, which was why the school's security guards were able to watch from the sidelines. As long as there weren't any major incidents, the school would turn a blind eye to the fight between the two sides. To put it nicely, it was exciting competition. However, right now Scylla was puzzled. Why did a commoner have the guts to pick a fight with a noble here? Weren't they afraid of the nobles' retaliation? It wasn't that Scylla thought poorly of the nobles, but there were far too few people like Belle. Back on old Chang's planet, the few nobles he'd seen looked down on others with their noses raised high, as if to say, "Don't piss me off or I'll kill you." It was hard to compare to the current situation. Scylla asked Belle directly because he didn't understand the situation. After all, Belle was a real noble. "Belle, is there little difference between the commoners and the nobles in the school?" Bell rubbed his chin. That depends on the school. The better the school, the smaller the difference in treatment. As for Barenbader, although I've never heard of it before, according to the materials, since it's ranked in the top 10 in this star region, it has the ability to reduce the difference in treatment between civilians and nobles. After all, Barenbader once produced an honorary scholar of the RAS, and it's possible that the honorary scholar will be promoted to an academician of the RAS soon. Bell smacked his lips and tossed the empty bottle into the trash can. That honorary scholar is from the 23rd sector of the Empire. He received his secondary education in Barenbader when he was young, but he was picked up by a school in the sector where the imperial capital is located because he excelled too much. After that, he entered the Royal Academy of Sciences and became an honorary scholar. Isn't there a lot of space in the introduction of the school in Barenbader about the honorary scholar coming back to his alma mater to give a speech? Of course Scylla knew that Barenbader had produced an honorary scholar, but he didn't think that it would be enough to make Barenbader compromise to such an extent. It was because he had seen the difference between nobles and commoners that Scylla was surprised to hear that a commoner could argue with a noble student at Barenbader, and the school didn't seem to care at all. Bell chuckled when he saw Scylla's surprise. That's the RAS we're talking about. It's no small institution. It's the RAS. My old man tried to push me into it back in the day, but I failed. I have no talent in my head. Bell pointed at his own head, but he didn't sound depressed. It was as if he was talking about something normal. Bell told Scylla a bit about the RAS, and it was only now that Scylla realized that nobles weren't the only ones standing at the top of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. The RAS was the highest academic institution and research center in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. It was also the highest hall of honor for researchers. It was an independent institution that wasn't directly under the control of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Interestingly enough, 70% of the RAS's members were commoners, not nobles. It was also worth mentioning that the current president of the RAS was a commoner. This alone was enough to force some nobles to think carefully when dealing with certain issues. Anyone who could enter the RAS was no weaker than some mid-level nobles, especially the few veteran researchers. Even the royal family had to be polite to them. After all, they played an important role in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire's development. The RAS was the authority of academia, just like the League of Stars' League of Stars Research Institute. The RAS also had academicians, but academician was an honorary title that recognized a person's academic ability. Although it wasn't divided into several ranks like the League of Stars, the RAS was still divided into two categories, honorary scholar and academician. In the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, the academicians of the RAS had a lot of responsibilities. Aside from their own research projects, they would regularly attend meetings held by the RAS's various departments to discuss recent scientific progress and report on the latest scientific developments. They would also participate in all kinds of academic seminars organized by the RAS's interdisciplinary committees. Sometimes, they would accept commissions from noble companies to do research and development work. They would also accept invitations from famous schools to give lectures and give lectures. They would also participate in all kinds of scientific awards and evaluate the overall strength of middle and high-level schools. The Mist Bodhisattva Empire was an empire that worshipped science and knowledge. That was why the academicians of the RAS were highly respected and held high social status. They were no longer commoners or nobles, and they enjoyed special privileges in certain places. In fact, they were even more privileged than some nobles. There were many times when a noble's family business would need to hire the RAS's guidance if they wanted to develop properly. One could imagine what would happen if a noble completely offended the RAS's people. The monarch and the three kings mostly respected the RAS's people. Did your family have more influence than the monarch and the three kings? It didn't matter what kind of society they lived in, people who worshipped academics and devoted themselves to them were all the same. They had their own worldview, and they had their own beliefs no matter who they were facing. The main reason Barenbader was able to become one of the top 10 academies in the Star region was because they had the right to show off their RAS's honorary scholar. That was why Baron Bader was always looking forward to the appearance of the next honorary scholar. Every year, there would be a few people who were accepted into the Empire's famous higher education schools, but none of them ever made it into the RAS. In fact, every year, the school of Baron Bader invested more effort into the commoners than the nobles. After all, nobles were always at a disadvantage when it came to academic competitions. You couldn't expect those noble students who only knew how to dress up and flirt with girls to do research for you, could you? That was basically impossible. Of course, it wasn't like one group of people could kill a whole group of people. There were many capable people among the nobles, and there were also some who came from noble backgrounds in the academy. After all, the RAS wasn't a place where you could get into just because you had connections. There was no absolute relationship between IQ and character, and there was no absolute relationship between IQ and family background. The better the school, the more peaceful they would be with the commoners. As long as you had the ability, you could enjoy the same treatment as the nobles, or even better. "Yo, the fight's almost over," Belle said. Sillin looked over. The school's security guards had already gone up to stop the fight. Both sides were bruised and battered, but their injuries weren't serious. At the very least, they weren't life-threatening. By the time both sides had left, the onlookers had mostly left as well. "Let's go find Little 3 and Little 4, Sillin said as he stood up and dusted off the grass on his clothes. Belle placed his palm on his forehead and looked around the school buildings. "Where are we going to find them? Dormitories? I think they're about to start class." "Sillin, that electronic bulletin board over there shows the overall ranking of the students." Hui Mao pointed in a direction. There was a large bulletin board not far away. It was used by the school to announce the results of the comprehensive test. "Let's see if we can find Little 3 and Little 4's names." Sillin and Belle walked over to the bulletin board. Since the board had been showing the overall ranking for quite some time, there weren't many people around to see it. Belle looked through the top 100 names of the first grade and sighed. "I don't see Little 3 and Little 4. "Yes, they are in the 31st and 37th place." Sillin pointed out the names to Belle, 31st Chang Xiao and 37th Chang Fu. "Not Little 3 and Little 4. Little 3 and Little 4 are just their nicknames. Chang Xiao and Chang Fu are their real names," Sillin explained. "I see." Sillin moved his finger on the control panel below the notice board and pointed at Little 3 Chang Xiao and Little 4 Chang Fu's names. Their classes, and the location of their classes were displayed. Inside the school surveillance room, someone said, "Huh. There are 2 people checking Chang Xiao and Chang Fu's information today. Speaking of which, aren't Chang Xiao and Chang Fu commoners?" All the information recorded on the bulletin board would be displayed in the surveillance room. "They are indeed commoners," another person said. "They were in the 80s during the entrance test, but now they're in the top 50. They have great potential, but no one has ever checked their information before." The 2 of them didn't pay much attention to it after that. After all, things like this happened all the time, and they were already used to it. On the other side, Belle and Sillin were preparing to go to Chang San and Chang Si's classroom. There were still 2 hours before the end of class, so Sillin and Belle decided to take a look around the school first. The school's environment was pretty good, but there were plenty of young boys and girls in the secluded woods. Most of them were the children of nobles. Belle even went to eavesdrop on them with a perverted look on his face. Sillin's face twitched uncontrollably. So this is the real prince of the Blaze Eagle royal family. If the citizens of Mist Bodhisattva Kingdom were to learn of this prince's behavior, they would definitely be horrified. Hui Mao jumped back onto Sillin's shoulder after running into the bushes to catch small insects. There was still pollen at the corner of its mouth from eating 2 large butterflies. Licking its paw, it wiped the corner of its mouth and patted Sillin. "Let's go, it's going to rain soon." Sillin looked at the sky and saw that clouds were indeed starting to float over. However, it didn't look like it was going to rain. Even though it didn't look like it, Silen still did as Huimao said. He gestured to Belle and ran to the vending machine to buy 2 umbrellas. He had planned to buy 4, but there were only 2 left in the machine. Even with the rapid advancement of science and technology, these primitive tools hadn't been eliminated yet. Not many changes had been made to them. Many people preferred to use these primitive tools in the rain and experience the world being washed away by the rain. In many places, people couldn't see the rain and nature of nature. As expected, 5 minutes later, the clouds in the sky suddenly grew thicker and the rain began to fall. Some young couples hurriedly abandoned their rendezvous, and some even remotely controlled their flying cars to pick them up. Some of the crazier kids were holding hands and running in the rain, laughing loudly. Belle ran over and caught the umbrella Silen threw at him. He opened it and cursed, "The sky was clear just now, and now it's raining. What kind of shitty weather is this? It's worse than our AF3. AF3? Silen asked. Belle flicked the water off his hair and raised his chin proudly. He was about to say something when he looked around to make sure no one was around. Then, he whispered, "I'm studying at the RAS-affiliated 3rd Higher Education School, or AF3 for short. What do you think? Jealous?" Belle didn't try to hide it. He knew that Silen had already guessed his identity, so he was more than willing to admit it. Silen, on the other hand, didn't have much of a reaction. Given Belle's background, it wasn't strange for him to study at a good school. It wasn't hard to imagine how important a school with the prefix RAS was compared to other schools. However, why AF3? There's AF1 and AF2 in front of it. Belle curled his lips. There are only 3 higher education schools affiliated to the RAS, and our AF3 is the most normal. The other 2 schools are filled with freaks. Belle shook the goosebumps on his skin as if he had thought of something terrifying. He turned to Silen and said seriously, "It's true, they're all freaks. If you hear of anyone from AF1 or AF2 in the future, you have to be careful, or you'll end up miserable." Silen nodded. Got it. Belle didn't talk too much about AF1 or AF2. Instead, he talked about how he and his 2 bad friends were at AF3. They were the famous 3 dissolute swordsmen of AF3. They didn't have a lot of good things to say, but they had a ton of bad things to say. Belle was talking excitedly when Silen asked, "Speaking of which, you're still in higher education, aren't you?" Belle's voice came to an abrupt halt. Ahem, about that. I need to adjust my mindset from time to time. I can't just throw myself into my studies. My brain is small, and I can't take in so many complicated things at once. I have to clear my memory every once in a while. Silen was amused. You think you're in the right? Of course, Silen wouldn't comment too much on other people's business. Everyone had their own way of thinking. Belle felt a little awkward. To distract himself, he pointed at Huimao. What's that cat listening to? Silen looked over. Huimao wasn't even paying attention to their conversation. His ears were perked up as he listened to something intently. From the frequency at which his whiskers moved, Silen could tell that the cat had found its prey. This guy would move his whiskers at a certain frequency whenever he heard the sound of prey. Silen flicked Huimao's ears. What did you hear? Huimao smiled sweetly. Frogs. Frogs? Belle's eyes lit up. When I was in AF3, Xingming, Canuo, and I caught frogs and roasted them back at the dorm. They were delicious. Under the eager gaze of a man and a cat, Silen headed to the place Huimao said had frogs. There was still an hour before Little 3 and Little 4's class ended. They still had time. There was a lotus pond in Baron Bader that was filled with frogs. Unlike normal frogs, these frogs didn't go through a metamorphosis period. In other words, they didn't go through the stage of tadpoles. Instead, they directly developed into frogs. The lotus pond was huge, and the weather in Baron Bader was perfect for the growth and reproduction of these frogs. Frogs could be heard croaking most of the year. However, many nobles didn't bother to catch these slimy creatures, and some civilians didn't have the guts to do so. After all, in Baron Bader Academy, it was good enough that they could enjoy relatively equal treatment. They didn't dare to catch the frogs in the lotus pond. Some nobles saw them catching frogs and laughed at them. After that, very few people came to catch frogs. Maybe it was because the students of Baron Bader didn't attack the frogs sitting on top of the lotus leaves carelessly that the frogs had grown bolder. They didn't even move their legs when they saw Sillin and Belle walking towards them. Only when Belle caught him with a smirk on his face did he croak, then fall silent as Belle skillfully knocked him out cold and tossed him aside. 1. Keep going. We have to get at least one dish. Belle was very skilled at catching frogs. He held an umbrella with one hand and grabbed a frog near the road with the other. Hui Mao had already jumped into the pond to play. There were plump fish and stupid frogs in the pond. It was enough for him to play for a while. Sillin put the frogs that Belle knocked unconscious into his bag and thought about how he was going to eat them later. While Chang San and Chang Si were listening attentively in class, they would never have imagined that these two people who were older than them by more than 10 years and should be much more mature were currently catching frogs in their school's lotus pond. Chapter 229. The rain had stopped for 20 minutes or so, but it suddenly started pouring again right before the end of class. The rhythmic sound of music rang out. It was the end of the class bell, and it was also the chorus of the school song of Baron Bader. Many students rushed out of the classrooms in the teaching area. The wealthier students who had smart flying cars directly walked into the cars that were already parked there, so they didn't need to be drenched in the rain. Some people came to pick them up, while others waited for the school bus. A few noble students came out together and boarded their flashy flying cars. Then, they made a 180-degree turn and threw the dripping rainwater onto the people around them. Looking at the people who laughed and left, the rest of the people pointed at the back of the car and cursed. Chang Fu IV and Chang Fu were doing homework in the classroom. It was raining heavily outside anyway, so he didn't bring an umbrella. He could save the money for the school bus ride. Chang III, Chang Shao, was reading a book next to Chang IV. It was a book she had borrowed from the school library yesterday that described the main characteristics of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire's star regions. Chang III and Chang IV were twins, but their personalities were very different. Chang III was always smiling, just like her name. Chang IV, on the other hand, rarely smiled. She was always lukewarm except for a few people she was particularly close to. A girl walked over while the two were busy. She could tell that Chang Fu came from a wealthy family. Chang Fu, I have an extra umbrella. You can borrow it. The girl placed a double-layered foldable umbrella on Chang Fu's desk. The umbrella was about 3 meters wide when opened. It was enough for Chang Fu and Chang Shao to use. Before Chang Fu could refuse, another shrill voice rang out. Yo, trying to curry favor again. Say, Lanani, you're a noble, aren't you? You're a disgrace to us nobles. The speaker was a girl about the same age as Lanani. She was dressed very well, with shiny chains around her neck and wrists. Chang Shao closed her book and looked at the frowning and impatient Chang Fu. She sighed. What a low EQ guy. She had to mediate every time. Chang Shao was about to say something when a cat's meow caught her attention. Why would there be a cat in a classroom? What's more, it was a rainy day. Chang Shao followed the sound and saw a Hui Mao squatting on the windowsill, staring at them with its round eyes. Who? Chang Shao cried out in surprise. Chang Shao and Chang Futong had met Hui Mao when they were watching a video at home. Seeing Hui Mao, Chang Fu, who had always kept a straight face, also revealed a trace of a smile. If Wei's was here, it meant that Sillin was also here. Chang Shao closed his book and quickly packed his things. He thanked Lanani and left with Chang Fu. Sillin and Belle were standing outside the school building with umbrellas in their hands. When they saw Chang Xiao and Chang Fu, Silen waved them over. "Brother Silen, when did you arrive?" Chang Xiao asked. "I came here at noon today." Taking Chang Xiao's bag, Silen opened up the second layer of the umbrella to cover the area. Silen and Chang Xiao shared one umbrella, while Belle and Chang Fu shared the other. Belle, on the other hand, was quite talkative. He didn't stop talking on the way to Chang Fu's dorm, from the fight they'd witnessed at the school gates to where they'd gone to catch frogs at the lotus pond. Watching Chang Xiao and Chang Fu leave, Lenani waved her hand and a pink flying car flew over to her. Lenani jumped into the flying car and swung the car, throwing all the rainwater at Sharapova, who had been making sarcastic remarks just now. Just you wait, Lenani." Sharapova stomped her foot and hopped into her red flying car. Perhaps she was too angry that she lost control of her car, and it collided with another flying car next to it, causing another commotion. Still, things like this were common enough. The two left cursing at each other. Chang Xiao and Chang Fu's dorm rooms weren't far from each other, but everyone was heading straight to Chang Fu's room to roast frogs. Every dorm room had 4 bedrooms and 1 living room, and every student had a 15 square meter bedroom. They didn't have to pay for their accommodation fees, and the top 100 students were free of charge. However, most of the students here were commoner students. Noble students preferred single apartments, and they would rather pay a high rent than live with commoner students. Someone had already returned to the dorm room, and the bathroom was running. Hearing someone's return, the boy opened the bathroom door and was just about to jump out naked. Luckily, he reacted fast enough to stop himself midway when he saw a stranger and a girl in the room. "Hee, so it's Chang Xiao," the boy said a little awkwardly. Everyone knew about Chang Fu's twin sister. Chang Xiao rolled her eyes at him. She knew the personalities of Chang Fu's roommates very well. "His name is Kurt, and he's my roommate." Chang Fu introduced him simply. After Ku Te greeted him, he retreated back to his shower. Not bad. When he saw Chang Fu and the others, Silen thought that he was reminded of his time at Seven Lights. "Sigh, I'm still homesick." Belle didn't think too much into it. He went to the kitchen and rummaged through the stuff. Finally, he dragged out a dusty simple grill from under the groceries, washed it, and began to process the frogs impatiently. Silen didn't help Belle as he watched him skinning the frogs with practiced ease. The guy could do it all by himself. While Belle was taking care of the frogs, Silen called Chang Xiao and Chang Fu into the room and gave them the card with 100,000 MB worth of money. Old man Chang gave it to them. He then explained the current situation of the shop to them. "This carry has 100,000 MB on his card. The shop is much better now, and the standard of living is much better. You don't need to be too frugal. You're still growing, and you can't starve. You won't be able to keep up if you lack nutrition, and you won't be able to pass the general evaluation, am I right?" A while later, Silen came out of the room. His main purpose this time was to pass the card to them and pass their new identification documents to them. The moment he walked out of the room, Silen saw Belle and the boy named Kurt squatting next to the grill and working on it. Belle was sharing his own experience. The more primitive the grill, the better. There's no way the sealed automatic grill machine can make a frog taste as good as the former. Speaking of eating this thing, Silen shook his head. Gluttons like these were everywhere. Seeing Chang Fu and the others come out, Kurt turned around and said, "Oh right, Lu Jia said he'd bring us food. Should we tell him not to?" Lu Jia was their roommate, and he dragged them to the cafeteria the moment class was over. Chang Fu nodded, "I'll tell him." He took out his communicator and dialed Lu Jia's number, but the call didn't connect even after a long time. Chang Fu dialed again, and the call connected this time. However, the person on the line wasn't Lu Jia, but another roommate who was closer to Lu Jia. The call was cut off again before he could even say 2 words. However, the image that popped up on the communicator showed the situation on the other side. It was a mess. "Another fight?" Chang Xiao asked. "Doesn't look like it." Something must have happened. Chang Fu dialed the number a few more times, but no one picked up. He picked up an umbrella and walked out. I'm going to the cafeteria to take a look. Hey, Lil, 4. Chang Xiao saw Chang Fu run off without looking back, so she turned around to look at Silan. Big brother Silan, I'm going to take a look too. Sure, let's go together. Silan grabbed the umbrella and walked out with Chang Xiao. Wait for me. Hey, kid, you stay here and roast the frogs. You have to be careful not to burn them. If you burn one, go to the lotus pond and catch another one to make up for it. Bell said as he poked Kurt's forehead. Kurt wanted to cry. The lotus pond was so far away from here. There were quite a few cafeterias in the school. Lu Jia and the others liked the one closest to the training grounds the most because it had the most meat and portions. Before Chang Fu even got close to the cafeteria, he saw a group of people at the training grounds in the distance, shouting and shouting in the heavy rain. They really were fighting again. Chang Fu rushed over. Lu Jia and the others were easy to find because they were usually the vanguard of a fight. However, Chang Fu couldn't find them even after searching for a long time. He casually grabbed a person to ask. This person was also a commoner student. Right now, his eyes were bloodshot from fighting. These damned nobles. They injured Lu Jia and Tai Tuesday. They've gone too far. I'll fight them to the death. After saying this, the child rushed back into the fray. Injured? Seriously injured? With Lu Jia and Tai Tu's abilities, they were considered to be at the top of the school, especially Tai Tuesday. He was a fourth-year student, and his overall grades were always in the top 3. His individual battle prowess was quite outstanding. Chang Fu had never heard of Tai Tu being heavily injured. If that was the case, then this fight would no longer be a small one. Just as Chang Fu was looking for Lu Jia and Tai Tu, his communicator rang. Chang Fu, don't get involved. This isn't a simple matter. Hurry up and leave. It was Linani. After all, she was a noble with a decent rank, so she knew some things better than others. However, Chang Fu didn't pay attention to her warning. He had already seen Lu Jie. He squeezed through the crowd and went over. During this time, he had already been punched a few times, but just now, he saw a flash of cold light. A knife? One had to know that in order to not cause too much damage, no lethal weapons were usually used in a fight. However, Chang Fu really did see that flash of cold light. Chang Fu was also very sensitive to sound. The sound of a knife cutting through raindrops, the sound of a knife hitting a person, there was no mistaking it. It was a knife. Someone had actually broken the rules. Lu Jia and Taida were lying on the ground. On the surface, they didn't seem to be injured, but the two of them were extremely weak. They didn't even have the strength to stand up. Even the slightest movement would cause them pain. Every raindrop that landed on their bodies felt like a heavy hammer. Lu Jia, Taitu, how are you guys? Chang Fu, be careful. After receiving Lu Jia's warning, Chang Fu dodged to the side and leaped several times, leaving his original position. Just then, a chill brushed past his clothes. Chang Fu didn't even need to look to know that the back of his clothes had been cut. However, before Chang Fu could even heave a sigh of relief, that cold light chased after him. It was too fast. At the same time, Chang Fu felt his movements become much slower. Compared to that cold light, he really couldn't react in time. If the other party had just casually attacked him earlier, then this time, he was going to kill him. With this knife, Chang Fu would definitely be in an even worse state than Lu Jia and Taitu. Pa! The sound of a knife breaking rang out. Before the knife could reach Chang Fu, Silan used his finger to break the knife's edge, then grabbed the person's neck and smashed him into the ground. Since when did adults have to be so ruthless in a battle between children? As Silan spoke, the body of the person who had been smashed into the ground slowly elongated. With the crisp sound of bones cracking, the person who looked to be about the same age as Chang Fu and the others had already transformed into a burly adult man. Fuck, this is fucking cheating. Lu Jia, Taitu, and the others finally understood why something was wrong. Previously, they had only thought that these people looked unfamiliar and were much stronger than them. At first, they thought that they were just experts that the nobles had recruited. They didn't expect that these bastards would actually find outside help. Seeing that his comrade was still in his original form after being smashed into the ground, another person rushed out from the battlefield and charged at Silen. You motherfucker! Before the person could finish speaking, Bell had already rushed over and sent him flying with a kick. When the person landed on the ground, there was a huge splash. Bell propped up his umbrella again and stuck one hand into his pocket. He said slowly, "What a bunch of scum. Sigh, you've lost all the face of the nobles. You're even cheating in such a lowly way. You really can't do anything." Compared to the 3 swordsmen of AFS, these people were truly pathetic. Silen curled his lips. This bastard is even trying to act cool now. Crack. The sharp sound of something shattering attracted the attention of many people. Silen threw the broken knife in his hand to the ground. If anyone moves again, they'll end up like this knife. Someone tried to slip away, but Silen smashed him into the ground before he could even take a single step. No one dared to move again. Silen's movements were too fast. One moment he was there, the next moment he was somewhere else. They weren't inexperienced people, and they knew that this was the difference between them and Silen. Their eyes couldn't even keep up with Silen's movements. They couldn't even see what was happening with their eyes. A flying car flew over and landed. A middle-aged man with a fat belly walked out of the car. He asked in surprise, "Hey, what's going on? What's going on? Who are you two? This is Baron Bader Academy. Who are you? Where did you come from? Not everyone can enter this place. Are you two from one of the trashy schools around here? Don't disturb the students of Baron Bader." "Oh, it's the vice dean," someone said sourly, emphasizing the word vice. "Lackeys of the nobles. They're all the same. Trash. What the hell? Bah." The commoner students scoffed at this vice head of teaching, and all of them had good expressions on their faces. "Master, I don't know where these two came from. They're probably from one of the trashy schools. Or maybe they didn't even go to school." The noble students sneered. They'd always been fearless. Even if they were the ones who broke the rules first, they were nobles and enjoyed special privileges. The school had to give them some face. Did these commoners really think they were future academicians of the Royal Academy of Sciences? Commoners will always be commoners. They deserve to die. The vice-director walked up to Silen and Bell and was about to say something when a couple of noble students accused him of something. He was about to say something, but when he saw Silen lift the man off the ground and smash him down, he swallowed his saliva and swallowed his words. He couldn't help but feel like an empty shell in front of Celine and Belle. The situation was at a stalemate. The nobles didn't say anything either. None of them wanted to be the first to stand out. After the deputy director of teaching arrived, the security guards finally arrived. The vice dean straightened his back a lot when he saw the guards rushing over. He pointed a thick finger at Belle, who was trying to act cool, and said, I'm talking about you. You don't have any manners, and you don't have any manners at all. You're obviously an uneducated person." The vice dean of students began to lecture Belle in the same manner he usually did when he lectured his students. It was obvious that he knew Silen wasn't a pushover, so he went straight for Belle, who was pretending to be cool. Silen sighed inwardly. It was time for the vice dean to die. "You said that the real prince of the Blazing Eagle royal family had not received any education. Even if he had no manners and was sloppy, it was far from your place to speak. The Blazing Eagle king did not care, so what qualifications do you have to speak?" Belle stood in the same position as he listened to the vice dean's lecture. Belle smiled. You're asking me who I am. I'm not going to change my name. I was just about to eat a frog. Everyone. So cold. What did "not going to change my name" have to do with "I was just about to eat a frog"? Besides, who cared if you were eating a frog or a duck's egg? When Silan saw that the vice director was about to continue, he immediately sat on the back of the person lying on the ground and kicked the person's restless feet. Behave yourself. The man froze when he heard Silan's words. He didn't dare to move. Others might not know why, but he knew very well that the person sitting on his back might not be old, but the aura that was released in that instant was so powerful that he didn't dare to move at all, and he obediently let himself be gripped. Killing intent? Not exactly, but it was scarier than killing intent. He didn't know why, but this person was terrifying. He was like a gun hidden behind a fog. You didn't know where he would be, or when he would put you in his sights. He couldn't afford to provoke the nobles, but he didn't want to provoke this person either. The best thing to do now was to pretend to be unconscious. The vice dean was trembling with anger as he glared at Belle. No matter what you asked him, he would answer with a completely irrelevant answer. From the looks of it, this brat still had a sincere look on his face, as if he was telling the truth. You, which school are you from? I'm going to talk to your principal and teachers. How do they educate their students? I'm afraid you don't have the right. Let me tell you, I know all the principals of the top 10 schools. Regarding this, the deputy head of teaching was very proud and was quite proud of himself. Oh, I see. All right then, prick up your pig ears. I'm from AF3. Go talk to our principal, he likes to be talked to. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.